Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable number 33. I can't believe that we're up to number 33, a third of the way to 100. I don't know if I get a plaque for that or anything, but anyway, I am joined today by Alex Krainer and Tom Luongo. Sorry, excuse me,
Hmm.
Tom.
No
We're going to
worries.
be discussing the economy. Alex, how's it going?
It's going very well. Good to join you, Gonzalo. Tom, I look forward to having an interesting chat. So much going on.
Yeah, Alex is an author and a former hedge fund manager, and he's terrific. By the way, I don't currently have the links to Alex and Tom, but after the broadcast, I'll be posting both. So, Alex, it's a pleasure to have you on. And Tom,
Pleasure to
it's a
be here.
great pleasure to meet you finally. I've been
Yeah,
reading you for years.
yeah. No, thank you, Gonzalo, and I appreciate that. And yeah, this is a real treat. Alex and I just did one of these with Sean Newman on Tuesday, so we've got our patter down, so we should be good to go.
Okay, that's good to know. It's like the Abbott and Costello of global finance. So,
Uh,
yay.
Alex and I have done at least three previous podcasts on my podcast together. So Alex and Alex was actually my first guest the first time I ever decided to try and do a podcast.
Uh-huh.
And I really enjoyed that's where we started. I reached out to him because I wanted he wrote the book about Bill Browder, which
Hmm.
if you haven't read it, y'all need to read it because it's freaking brilliant. And it really set me down a really important rabbit hole. So Alex has been a very important person for me because he was really good at having forbearance with a completely green interviewer, and so I always credit him for that. So
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure to
Thank
have you
you.
both
Thank
on.
you.
Yeah, yeah. And well, what should we talk about? Should we talk about football, or should we talk about I don't know, kite
sports
flying,
ball. I'm a hockey fan.
or should we talk about Jerome Powell getting a little panicky and freaking out the markets?
I
Did you guys see what happened today?
Oh, yeah, our whole lives revolve around the Fed. It's kind of funny, actually. Yeah, no, I've been saying for a while now that I'm the guy who's sitting there going, look, dude, Powell's going to raise a heck of a lot harder and faster than anybody wants him to. And even I didn't think he was going to do this. So I was like, dude, are you like reading my mind or something? Like, but it was. I've been seriously impressed with what I'm seeing, and everything I see from Powell is just confirms all the things that I started talking about this around June of last year, theorizing that did Powell just like fart in the room of all the central bankers? Did he just fart? They're all like talking about climate change, and he's talking about draining the offshore dollar markets, and I'm like, okay, what does this mean? And I didn't dare to dream that maybe the Federal Reserve was like working against this terrible freaking globalist cabal that's uh, trying to go for global communism. I'm like, this is crazy, and it's just
I,
kind of bore itself out the entire way through, and it's really obvious to me now. So Alex and I have chatted about this to hell and gone. So
yeah, Alex, what do you think of the raise today? Or yesterday, I suppose.
Well, look, it's unsurprising, but let's say reassuring because like you're always guessing, and there's always a chance you could be wrong. And what I asked Tom in yesterday's podcast is like, how come there isn't more political pressure and a media harangue attacking the Fed and particularly Jay Powell? Uh, we saw some timid, deferential, uh, you know, requests coming from the UN. I don't know where exactly. I couldn't find that, but they're like, can't you stop with these interest rate hikes? And I don't know what that does. I don't know if he can be got to. If he could be got to. I saw just yesterday after our podcast, I saw that Elizabeth Warren is now trying to mount some kind of political pressure against Powell to stop the interest rate hikes and to reverse towards the dovish policy. But obviously, it's not working, and they're standing their ground. And this is having a huge impact globally, not just the United States. This is massive globally. And the fact that they're listening to Tom Luongo is awesome.
Well, Alex, it was UNCTAD. It was the UN Council on Trade and whatever D stands for, diplomacy.
Okay.
They're the ones
Okay.
who issued the letter to Powell saying, "Don't please stop raising interest rates." And Powell's like,
Please,
75.
please stop. Please stop.
Like 75 basis points. No, really, it's 75 basis points, and it's going to be. And the thing that surprised me yesterday was that, again, like, you know, every time we get close to a Fed meeting or we just have a Fed meeting, what we have is a whole lot of narrative control. Oh, well, the Fed just pivoted, or they're signaling they're going to pivot. They're going to do this. And, you know, I don't know if you guys saw this, but which was the report that after all of the pivot talk after the July rate hike and the euro bounced and everybody was talking about Powell pivoted, this, that, and everything else, Powell had to change his speech at Jackson Hole, because he was going to talk about other things. And he finally said, no, 8.5 minutes. No, really, we're raising rates. Shut up. And then he mic dropped and walked off the stage in 8.5 minutes and blew all of those narratives completely out of the water. And then yesterday, you know, 75 basis points, I think everybody understood. And I think the markets were clearly signaling that they understood that it was 75 basis points. LIBOR was signaling 75 basis points in both the 1 month and 3 month markets. But the big one was that the freaking presser was even more hawkish than I expected him to be. I expected once we got to 4, they would start to back off on the talks a little bit and then, you know, I've been calling 6% at the top of the rate hike cycle, kind of almost half facetiously since, like, I don't know, April. Like, you know, I think the Fed's going to 6. I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, honestly, just to get people, to shock people.
And don't worry, you know, we're demonetized here, so you can say whatever you want.
Oh, okay, cool. I never, you know, I get salty.
Go for it. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, so, you know, I was just, you know, pulling like, hey, how about this number? It's 6%. And the more I think about it, the more I think 6% is actually the likely terminal rate. You know, how do we think the CPI is going to go to 9 or 10%, top off, and then, you know, they get to the 6% terminal rate? I think that breaks Europe, and I think that's the whole point. So yeah, I was actually surprised he was as hawkish as he was yesterday.
What do you mean the whole point is to break the European economy?
No, it's to break the old European money. See, the reason that the world does not want the Federal Reserve, I've been saying this for a while now, but I'll try and do this quickly for your audience, because anybody who doesn't follow me doesn't know what's going on. Alex has heard this before, and he and I have talked about this at length. And I also don't mean to hog the mic, by the way, but really, my thesis has been, since the day that Powell last year raised the reverse repo rate 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate and started draining the world of dollar liquidity, offshore dollar liquidity. So now think of this as like the same setup as like offshore yuan, onshore yuan. We have offshore dollars, euro dollars, and we have onshore dollars. Monetary policy in the US is subordinate to the offshore dollar market, the euro dollar markets, because it's orders of magnitude bigger than the domestic dollar markets. So, and my dog is going to like make noise every once in a while because she agrees with me about everything. So, so the gig here is that once that started, it broke the euro bull market. And all I said last year was, oh my God, the euro dropped 3 cents. What does this mean? And then I started going through all the stuff that I had heard from various sources, from Mark Armstrong and from Powell himself, from this one. And then I was listening to the speeches by Jamie Dimon and all this stuff. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are they actually off the reservation? Because 2 weeks before that, Powell had told all these people, the convocation of central bankers, that he was not going to coordinate monetary policy with the rest of the world to fight climate change, which is the key Christine Lagarde thing, right? Okay. All right, now prove it, Jerome. Oh my God, that's nice. He said it. It doesn't mean anything. Prove it. And then he started proving it. And then he kept proving it. And until he was able to secure his second term politically, which the Biden administration played fast and loose with for like 9 months, he should have been reappointed in October, right? And he wasn't. And it took until March. He was not able and clear to start the rate hike cycle. And that was all political, because the offshore dollar markets are run by the old European banks, right? They're the ones most vulnerable to a rate shock. The ECB's held interest rates and deposit rate at minus 0.6% or minus 0.5% for 8 years now, right? They've destroyed the euro as a potential reserve currency because of this. Like, they've punished savers. They've done all this, and they forced upwards of what at that point, Alex, was it 14 trillion dollars worth of European sovereign debt was trading at a negative yield, something like that, right? It was some enormous number, and so then they wanted to keep it that way, while they kept creating this international idea that the United States was turning into clown world, and that we had political instability, and we had cultural instability, and crime was rampant, and all the rest of this stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is just an operation. This is just a typical friggin' PR operation. The reality is that something is happening behind the scenes here, and I think it's very powerful, and I think it's really simple. Davos's plan for the central bank digital currencies and all this stuff is to do away with commercial banking. You can't have technocratic European-style communism without destroying the two-tiered monetary transmission system, which goes from the central banks to the commercial banks, and the commercial banks to the retail money users, right? They want to collapse that into central banks to retail. Well, that cuts out the commercial banks. Who does the Fed work for? The biggest commercial banks in the world. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citigroup, right? All of them. Who's the most powerful political lobby in the world? The same guys. Who controls the Southern District of New York? Same guys. Who controls Fed policy? Same guys. So you're telling me, and this is all I did, was I asked some patrons of mine who are hedge fund managers and former Wall Street insiders who were literally bankrupted by Diamond and Lloyd Blankfein and the rest of them. I said, now correct me if I'm wrong, but do you really see Jamie Dimon turning over the keys to JP Morgan to Klaus Schwab and a bunch of German eugenicists? Yeah, German eugenicists, no less. I'm like, Jamie Dimon is Greek. There ain't no love lost between Greeks and Germans. It's like there ain't no love lost between Italians and Germans. Oh, by the way.
No, right. But
there ain't no love lost between the Germans and anybody.
So your thinking is that this whole play was basically a way to sort of like, tame inflation, sure, but also stick it to the Europeans and just blow their agenda off the table, as it were?
Yeah. No, I think the source of the World Economic Forum's real power is the ability to lever up offshore dollars through the European and Swiss and British offshore Caymans and the Hong Kong, Singapore, whatever. They'll lever those up and then use that to buy political influence and to buy governments and to buy budgets and everything else. Okay.
And Alex, are you? I mean, I want to bring in Alex because it's been real interesting, Tom. It's fascinating, as a matter of fact. But Alex, what's your thought? Are you like on board with Tom insofar as what he's postulating?
Yeah. Well, I also was a little bit agnostic about this because I imagined that they were coordinating policy, all of them, the central bankers. I didn't really think that the Fed would break ranks, and it was actually Tom's analysis that got me to believe that they are, and I think that over time and events are proving that this is real, and that Tom has got the right end of the stick.
Thank you.
And so, basically the Europeans are going to get screwed.
Well, I think they're getting massively screwed as we speak,
and I think they deserve it.
Abundantly. Abundantly. No, they need to be tarred and feathered and run out of town.
Spoken like a Croat Serb, right? Sorry, I hate to keep bringing up. I'm only half facetious when I say this. It's just to remind everybody that the whole concept of the European Union is to do away with all of the old tribal enmities within Europe. Is just dumb. It's just they're too deep. These are real divisions from centuries of war. And while I can appreciate the loftiness of the goal of trying to do away with European internecine wars amongst tribes, I don't think turning the whole thing into a technocratic superstate modeled on the USSR with just more Germans is a good idea. Like that's
Well,
the
no,
problem.
my thinking at this point is that number one, because of this whole Ukraine situation, the Europeans have completely demolished their own economies.
Yes.
They've cut themselves because they were basically European economies, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, depended on two things: cheap goods from China, cheap energy from Russia.
Yep.
And they killed the golden goose insofar as energy is concerned by these stupid sanctions that were just virtue signaling basically. And now they're actually starting to try to antagonize the Chinese. And so it's like they're they're killing themselves. And on top of that, now Powell, with this interest rate hike that they are not going to follow, all of a sudden, their currency is going to get hammered because of this.
Now, what's interesting about this, Gonzalo, is that as I was putting all this together, it was actually something that Alex wrote recently on a Substack that really pounded home for me that this entire energy crisis in Europe is a self-inflicted wound. And that is the whole Amsterdam natural gas and electricity pricing market, right? Alex is the one who went through how that whole thing. He wrote a great Substack article on this, and it was one of the first ones you did actually.
So Alex, can you recap that article?
I want you to talk about that, Alex, because this is important. Because I don't think anybody understands that the energy crisis in Europe is completely self-inflicted, not just through sanctions.
Well, not to go into too many details about it, but basically, first of all, we had this mass scale privatization and restructuring of the energy markets in Europe, and the European Commission has been pushing for cancellation of long-term contracts. So, European countries and these large corporations like Uniper and others have had very long-term contracts in place for supply of Russian gas. And so, it was stable quantities, stable prices, things that you can count on for long-term into the future. You could calculate cost of your production of good. You could basically it was a stable situation.
And by the way, these long-term contracts, how many years were they out?
Well, they were up to 30 years. Up to 30 years.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so the European Commission said that okay, by 2046, something like that, they all need to be canceled. But with the war in Ukraine, they just abruptly canceled them all. Right. And they were like, okay, no, we'll institute these efficient spot energy markets, price discovery, and so they created this exchange. What's it called? The mechanism, the title transfer mechanism, something like that in right. Holland, controlled by. It's thoroughly corrupt, because the board of directors are people from one of the clearing boards in London. The name escapes me now, but regardless, it's an utterly corrupt scheme, and so the result has been that the prices of energy have been going through the roof. Yeah. Instead of having these long-term contracts where the quantities you're receiving, the prices that you will be paying, what the cost of production is going to be, you're going to have natural gas for heating and so forth. They just upended everything and made the situation orders of magnitude worse. So entirely self-inflicted damage by these European technocrats.
And what was the motivation?
Honestly, I think they did it in order to blame Putin for this. And they put the sanctions on knowing full well that this was going to happen because the supply and demand for natural gas is incredibly inelastic. And then they can spike the price. And then you have to wipe out the German middle class. In order to get this done, you have to wipe out the German middle class. Okay. You have to, and I got one for you. I haven't even. I've been meaning to write about this, and I'm going to probably write a blog post about this tomorrow or Saturday when I get a little bit of time. Which is to say, look, here's the setup. First, you do away with the long-term contracts. Putin has been like, "Why do you want to do this? This is dumb."
Yeah.
And then, but if you want it, that's fine. You do what you want. And then when the time comes, and we get you into and then we goad you into a war that you don't want to fight, but we want you to strike first in, so that we can then be on the moral high ground. We can then sanction you and then say to the world that we're not going to take your gas anymore. You have this illiquid market in place where now it takes a couple $1 million worth of bids to spike the price of natural gas and electricity all across Europe through the roof, which then translates to everybody. And then, but you're trying to blame Putin for it when you're the ones who did it, right?
Okay,
Then,
so let me explain. Let me to recap this. You guys are basically saying that one of the motivations, not the only motivation, of course, for this whole conflict, but one of the motivations was the energy market to be able to break off these long-term contracts so that it could be all spot contracts, which are easy to manipulate. Alex, is that basically the point of it?
that's the first part. That's the first part of it.
Okay.
That's part of it. That's part of it. Yeah.
Okay. And now, why the destruction of the German middle class? That is obscure to me.
Okay. So now let's really go through this. What's their goal? They need to be able to default on the debt. How are you going to get the fiscally conservative German middle class, who are all very conservatively invested? Alex Mercuris over at the Duran makes this point all the time. Says, how do you get them and this bank, right, who doesn't want to monetize, who doesn't want to go do QE, doesn't want to do any of this stuff? How are you going to push reserves into a bankrupt and zombified European banking system, because you no longer can get those reserves at 0% from the Fed, right? You can't go and buy dollars from the Fed to stick stuff in the vault. You can't get treasuries at a reasonable price anymore. You can't. No. Now what are you going to do? So what you need to do now is you need to create the situation where you bankrupt the German middle class through energy prices, blame Putin for it, right? And then the next phase of that is to say, look, we're now going to nationalize the energy companies who are screwing you. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're already nationalizing Uniper, right? But now they're pushing it through in the Bundestag, 90% windfall profit tax on all profits for all energy energy producers in Germany. At the same time, so they want to nationalize the industry and or put price controls on now. And how are you going to put on price controls? How are you going to enforce price controls? You have to subsidize them. You get the Bundesbank to print a whole bunch of euros. So this is QE, and it's a way to bail out by stuffing the banks full of reserves. It's the same. It's no different than the COVID relief funds. I have it from multiple people who've talked about, they worked at French hospitals, Italian hospitals, like all these COVID relief funds flowed into these places, and they didn't spend a dime of them. And at the end of the package, they're like, well, we don't want the money back. The EU is like, no, it's yours. The ECB is like, it's yours. We don't want the money back. Why? Because it's sitting in the banks, keeping the banks from collapsing because they don't have any friggin' reserves. So the whole point of this is just, it's just a backdoor form of QE that the European Central Bank can't do directly. The member central banks have to do it because the ECB, unlike the Fed, cannot create reserves directly. They don't create euros directly. The member central banks create euros, right?
Okay, but ultimately,
then if in the United States, if Indiana or Florida created dollars and not the Treasury.
Cui bono? Who benefits ultimately from this whole arrangement?
Well, they need to get rid of. They need to default on the sovereign debt because the sovereign debt is unpayable. The pension systems are all broke. They're trying to. George Soros has already laid the plan out. They want to default on the debt, issue perpetual bonds, and then issue a digital euro. And the Hobson's choice in front of the European middle class is going to be: you can either have debt forgiveness, or you can starve and freeze to death.
Okay, so this whole issue is that basically the Europeans are over indebted with Eurobonds, and so they can't default, and so they're trying to figure out a way to get around that to actually default
Yes.
And the price of that is going to be the collapse in the living standards of Europeans. Is
Yes.
that basically the argument?
Basically. And with some finer points on it, because the goal is, of course, to roll up. What they're going to do is they're going to roll up political and economic control into the European Commission, well, that now has tax and spend authority,
Right.
thanks to the COVID relief bills, and the ECB by collapsing all the member central banks into the ECB, because guess who has pledged all their gold to the ECB? All the member central banks. Who has all of these target 2 cross-country liabilities. Mario Draghi, before he left the ECB, told the Italians when Matteo Salvini first took over, he's like, yeah, you guys can exit the euro, but you gotta settle up your target 2 liabilities. Otherwise, you have to give us your gold. Not just pledge it to the ECB, but give it to the ECB to basically give it to so they can pay off the Bundesbank.
Okay, so basically it's Europe is broke, over indebted, and the mechanism that they struck on was to but I don't understand the part about why would they want to spike the energy prices?
Because you have to create an energy crisis in order to get the fiscally conservative Germans and others so desperate that they'll take whatever is left, whatever crumbs are in front of them. Then when they go to a digital euro, they're going to forgive everybody's debt.
So, Alex, are you on board with this analysis?
Yeah, but I would go a little bit farther than that, because I would, I try to understand why would anybody even be doing this, because it barely seems coherent. It doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense. I mean, it's so demented and it's so idiotic that it's very difficult to even find a rational explanation. Why would anybody be doing this in the first place? And so here's how I work it out, and I'll admit it's a lot of dot connecting. It's not necessarily something I can prove to be true, but
Alex, all conspiracy theories are basically you're just 6 months ahead of the curve. That's all they are at this point.
Or if you're the Babylon Bee, you're 7 days ahead of the news.
This one might be a bit more than 6 months, but basically, we've been facing a structural energy crisis for years. It's been discernible many years in advance. So you had several papers written that were put together. One by British Ministry of Defense in 2012. There was one published by the German military, and one published by the American military. And they all agree on one thing, that we are running out of oil. Okay, whether that's true or not, that's the conclusion that they reached. The British Ministry of Defense projected that the barrel of oil would reach $500 by 2040. And the German Defense Ministry didn't put a price tag on it, but basically they paint the fallout from this crisis in extremely dismal terms, like breakdown in supply chains, breakdown in social orders, severe social uprising, like basically total collapse. So given that this Western bloc pretty much lost assurance that they were going to be able to control the main energy producing regions of the world, being Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Mexico, and so forth. I think that their agenda has been right. We're going to set the society entirely on a different energy basis.
Yes. And
like energy is everything. Okay, most of what we eat is hydrocarbons. The way our agriculture it has evolved, most of the cost of food that you eat is actually hydrocarbons. You're paying mostly for hydrocarbons. Fossil fuel energy accounts for something like 50 times the amount of physical labor that goes into production of goods, versus 50 times more than the work from muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they wanted to preempt the crisis by transitioning in advance and also making themselves independent from what's their political rivals, meaning Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and so forth. And so I think that the absolutely mad schemes that are being implemented today, and I think that, you know, if you look at them, it's like a rabid dog chasing its tail, is all part of this agenda of transition and of energy transition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why
And
did they transition to nuclear?
That's their plan. The plan is a nuclear hydrogen economy. The reason why Europe is doing this is simply what Alex is pointing towards. Who doesn't produce any hydrocarbons anymore?
But no, I mean, the question is that why are they so anti-nuclear at this point? And they're pushing all
Well,
this
they're not.
green
They're
energy
transitioning
bullshit.
quickly to pro-nuclear. Even the German Greens are now saying, "Look, we're going to have to accept nuclear power." Again, my dog agrees with me. The reason that they held off nuclear for a long time, because it was rightfully understood that the reason why we did the uranium-238 cycle in these light water reactors was because it produces plutonium, which you can use to make nuclear bombs. Right now, we're going to move to a different cycle where we're not going to be producing. We don't necessarily want to produce nuclear weapons. We can move the Department of Energy back under the Department of Defense, which is where it belongs in the first place, because it was always just an outsourced portion of the DoD's defense, the DoD's budget. What's going to happen now is we're going to rapidly move towards the uranium-233 cycle, I think, in their minds. But they also want to control that completely by doing away with relative to a hydrogen-based economy with big mega nuclear power stations. The oil and gas industry is incredibly decentralized, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though we've got a lot of regulatory capture in the oil and gas space, right? A lot of SOEs, a lot of, that's not the issue here. Relatively speaking, like, they can put up their toll booths on that, but they can't control the energy producers in Venezuela, Iran, as all the places that Alex talked about, Mexico, Russia, to a lesser extent, the United States. So in a nuclear economy, after 50 years of telling us that nuclear energy is dangerous and ugly and bad and terrible, even though everything other than Gen 1 reactors, all the Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4, and even Gen 5 reactors that are on the drawing boards, every one of them can't melt down, have no, don't have an appreciable amount of waste, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there's but what they've done is they've conditioned us to believe that nuclear is dangerous, and so the government has to control it.
But quite apart from that, I'm following your argument that this is basically a controlled demolition of the European economy because it's over indebted and it's completely hydrocarbon based insofar as its energy requirements. But I don't understand why for so long, and up until pretty much last week, everybody was so anti-nuclear. They were shutting down reactors left and right in France and Germany in particular, and so why didn't 15 years ago didn't they start with this issue of nuclear energy and really pushing it so as to avoid this catastrophe?
Easy. Brexit and Trump accelerated the entire timeline. This is all originally Agenda 2050, not Agenda 2030. See, the British people said no. Populism was starting to rise. Donald Trump comes in 2017, and now we're going to get to the second half of the Fed conversation, because this is what really spooked them. They actually lost control of the Federal Reserve the day Jerome Powell was appointed to the Federal Reserve Board. Because Trump understood all this in his own
Trumpian way, yeah.
Well, in his own, yeah. The word I'm thinking of is compromised way, right? I think compromise is the best word. He's just not he's savvy, but he's not that savvy, right?
Yeah.
But Powell was put in place, and his just to remind everybody of what I talked about with my patrons originally when I put the idea forward. The answer that I got when I asked the question, would Jamie Dimon turn over the keys to J.P. Morgan to a bunch of German eugenicists, the answer from my professional patrons was they don't call him private equity Powell for nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want you to put that in your head. Now let's go back to what Martin Armstrong's been saying for years about the repo crisis of 2019. What started there was J.P. Morgan, and just about only Morgan, to a lesser extent Goldman, but mostly Morgan, stopped taking European sovereign debt as repo collateral, which is what caused the SOFR blowout, which has caused the repo crisis in September 2019. The process of decoupling the American banking system from the offshore banking system started with the appointment of Powell as Federal Reserve Chairman and the appointment of John Williams to the New York Fed. And that's what started the ball rolling towards getting the secured overnight funding rate off the drawing board, which was sitting at the Fed for 10 years, which Obama and Geithner and Yellen and everybody else and Bernanke and all of them said, put the kibosh on. After, because it was there that we wanted to get off of LIBOR after the original LIBOR scandal, which is why, by the way, Dominique Strauss-Kahn was thrown out of the IMF and Christine Lagarde was put in. All of this stuff is like this. All these plans to undermine these people was actually dormant for like the entire Obama interregnum. Okay, and then when Trump came into power, he accelerated that process. SOFR went into, now I'm going to have to explain what SOFR is and why it's important, but the SOFR, and I blew Alex's mind when I first threw this at him cold in a podcast that we did together. I'm like, actually, I threw it before we started recording,
Okay,
and then
it
was hilarious. So poor Alex just sat there and went, "Oh my God."
It's that, look, I'll tell you, Tom, honestly, like all of this, it's like a lot of connecting the dots, but it doesn't fulfill a certain conditions that I usually have, which is motivation. Okay, because I don't see, I understand different specific moves that have taken place, but I don't see the connection that it's a grand conspiracy, that it's not a pre-planned kind of controlled demolitions type stuff. I just don't see it. Because like the repo market, the repo crisis, for instance, I see it. Yeah, J.P. Morgan was like, okay, no, these Euro bonds, we're just not up for it anymore because we don't really trust what the Europeans are doing. And so
Gonzalo, it's really simple.
The
people that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, but hang on a second, Tom.
We're dealing with who's going to be in charge.
Tom, perhaps to your mind, it's very simple. I'm not too bright, so I need to have it explained in a way that I understand who benefits. Number one,
sure.
Okay, what is the ultimate goal? Number two, and why the specific things that have happened over the past couple of years plays into the hands of these people. And so the thing is, I'm just not buying this. Okay, I see it much more as incompetence than as some master plan and
what I'm saying is I think the more I go back over the history of this, it seems to me that it was very clear that we had that the commercial banks in the United States didn't have any real political power in the United States to stop the freight train that was happening.
Stop what freight train?
The freight train of rolling up the central of destroying the Fed as the most powerful central bank in the world. The goal is global government through the UN and the IMF. Okay, that's the goal. They've stated it quite explicitly what they want to do. This is not conspiracy theory. They talk about this stuff openly. So
if I can, Gonzalo, if I can take it from a different angle to try to convince you that this is a grand conspiracy, it's we're dealing with a lot of details about what's going on, and part of what it is I think is a plan, and part of it is just parts of the plan not working out, and them making it up as they go along. However, here's the grand plan. It's been 50 years since we went off the gold standard, since Nixon, August 15, 1971. And it's been well understood and known by the globalists that the current fiat currencies would all go to nothing, that they would all collapse. This is mathematical inevitability. This is a certainty. And so what they needed to do is to prepare an alternative and obviously their fondest fantasy is to have a one world central bank issuing the digital currency for all of the world. So you have to destroy the commercial banks, you have to unite, or you have to eliminate individual nations' central banks and the sovereignty, and you have to do like Soviet style issuing a central bank digital currency, which is, obviously this is what we're talking about today. The problem with this is that people don't necessarily have to go along with it, and as we see, the concept of these digital currencies is that they would be programmable, right? The new money would be programmable so that they can control everything about your life. They could pretty much keep you in a digital slave colony. And when authorities throughout history tried to shut people into these extremely restrictive economic relationships, then people went and they spawned gray and black markets where they simply invented new means of exchange. So in order for them to prevent that from happening, they needed this enormous matrix of constant surveillance and total control, so that in whatever way possible, they would be able to meter the energy you use, the meat you eat, the insects you eat, everything you do, everywhere you go, everybody you meet. Because if your legal tender is a central bank issued programmable digital currency, and they say you're entitled to 100 grams of protein a week, you're entitled to 1 liter of gas per week, or whatever, whatever they come up with, you have to have 6 vaccines a year. If you disobey and you say like, screw this, I have a neighbor who is raising chickens and goats, and I'll buy some goat milk and goat cheese and eggs, and I'll exchange this by, using whatever currency, whatever means of exchange people invent, and they always do. You have to be able to track them and to control them totally, even to the point where Orwell's 1984 may seem like a picnic by comparison. So I think that that's the grand agenda, the conspiracy, and the strategy of the globalists. The problem is that once you propose to eliminate commercial banks, then people like JP Morgan might say like, really? I don't think so. And once you want to eliminate national central banks, then the most powerful central bank in the world, the Fed, might say, hell no, we're not going along with this. So now you have a fracture. Like when the plan was in blueprints and the world was stable and you were in the unipolar moment, then all these quote unquote elites could sit around the table and snort cocaine and admire each other and themselves and fantasize about this grand plan for a new global order where they were going to be like this ruling elite and everybody else is going to be completely controlled chattel, right? But once the ride got bumpy, you see that there are conflicting interests. And I think that a lot of what we see going on now are the results of fractures among the ruling elites. And as their plans aren't panning out, example, maybe they really wanted to eliminate nuclear energy, but now they see they're like, oops, shit, that's not working out. Let's put it back on. I suspect that those effects are not part of the plan, but those are the effects of them making it up as they go along, because the wheels are coming off of the agenda.
So let me just hang on. Let me just recap this whole idea that you guys have, which is basically that there is a group of people who want to have one world government They want to start off, obviously, with the Western democracies, which are they can more easily manipulate them than, say, the Chinese or the Russians at the time being, at any rate. And so they want to have some sort of one world government where it's all centralized, and the people who are running this one world government have control over everybody's political and economic life. Now, in order to do that, they think that the idea is that they have to carry out a controlled demolition of the social and economic fabric of the Western democracies, so that everybody will wind up turning to this one world government based on the United Nations and the IMF. And these people, by the way, are, who are they? Are they Americans or Europeans, for that matter? That's not clear. Or is it a cosmopolitan group? I don't see that. What's that?
Bingo. That's bingo.
Okay.
No,
you've got it. Your camera is reversed.
And who the people are, Gonzalo, are some are Americans. Like I, for example, the deeper I got into this, the more I realized that like Bank of New York Mellon and Bank of America are on board with Davos. They all went to Davos 2022 this year. Notice that JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup didn't go. Wells didn't go. They didn't send anybody. They didn't even send like VPs or head of. They didn't even send anybody interesting. Like Mary Erdos from JP Morgan didn't go to Davos. Jamie Dimon certainly didn't go to Davos this year. That's a big tell. Okay. So
the thing that happens to me is that, see, I know several people who go to Davos just about every year, and they basically go to schmooze and to meet other people and make contacts. And some of these people are fairly well off. I mean, 10, 11 figures, and they're not telling me that they're hanging out with some crowd where they're rubbing their hands together and trying to figure out how they're going to take over the world. Okay, and so
but if you read what they're telling you, they're telling you flat out this is what they want to do. If you read Christine Lagarde, if you read Klaus Schwab, if you read George Soros, if you read Mark Carney, if you read, they're the lieutenants for the people who actually. This is really the cartel of banks that have been running the world for a long time.
On the other hand, you're telling me it's a cartel of banks, and yet you're saying that there are.
But the American banks are no longer interested in this. Because it's what I was trying to say before when you interjected, which is that we now have a fight happening between two different groups of bankers for control of the West, for control of capital.
Okay, so who are the contenders? Who are the contenders?
In my mind, what I've identified over the course of the last year, that you've got Morgan, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and I think now also Morgan Stanley are aligned with the Fed. These are also, by the way, the primary shareholders in the New York Fed. You have on the other side, clearly you have the ones that are still going along with ESG. You've got Larry Fink at BlackRock, who's not a bank, by the way, he's just an asset manager with pretensions of becoming a banker. You have BOFA, you have Bank of America, for those of you who aren't financial guys, BOFA and Bank of New York Mellon and a few other smaller ones. And of course you have all the European banks. And then you have the ones that are caught in the middle, like Credit Suisse, because they're clearly going after the Swiss, and Swiss privacy and all the rest of that stuff. So there's a lot of these things that are happening that I could spend an hour and a half just going through all the little moves that I've seen in the last 3 months. But the core argument is that who is most vulnerable to a rate shock, and understanding that American monetary policy for most of the period post World War II was controlled, as Jeff Snyder has explained to everybody, it was controlled by the offshore dollar markets, by the euro dollar markets, because they are orders of magnitude bigger than the domestic dollar markets. And all of that debt up until this year was indexed to LIBOR. It was not indexed to a rate that was that had anything to do with American banking health. SOFR, which is the secured overnight funding rate, and it's the rate at which all U.S. debt is now indexed to, and has been slowly rolled out over the last 5 years. Now, SOFR is the law of the land here in the U.S. All of our credit cards, all of our mortgages, all of our interest, all of our stuff, all of our debt is indexed to SOFR, and the offshore dollar markets are still indexed to LIBOR, or pick another. Doesn't really matter. And because of that, when they catch a cold, it doesn't automatically transmit across, so that my credit card rates don't go up. My HELOC doesn't go up, regardless of the health of the bank. The bank doesn't have, my bank and my credit union do not have any control over, by virtue of the contract, don't have any real control over the interest rate that they charge me. It's based on the Fed funds rate, which is based on SOFR. But in the past, it was based on LIBOR. So the Fed could raise interest rates, say 2 or 2.5%, but LIBOR would blow out by 5%. And now all of the debt in the United States, all the variable rate debt and the credit revolvers, especially the credit revolvers, would go up by 5, 6, 7% as a function of LIBOR. So any spread between, over the Fed funds rate over LIBOR, which is, by the way, known as the FRA-OAS spread, that was always the thing that zero hedgers always used to try and figure out when the Fed was going to pivot. FRA-OAS isn't going to work like that anymore, because SOFR is the law of the land. And this is the thing that this is the moment when I finally convinced Alex of this. Alex and I had talked about this for months, a couple of times in the previous months, and he wasn't convinced, and even I wasn't convinced, because I kept saying, okay, we have this plan, we can see it, we have this thing happening, and we can see what's going on, but I didn't have the catalyst that would allow the Fed to raise interest rates and not have it unfairly affect the U.S. markets, when it has every time in the past, which is why 99% of the people who are out there screaming that the Fed had to pivot at 1%, the minute they tried to raise interest rates, they would immediately have to pivot. They did this in March, were wrong. And I kept saying, nope, Fed is going to raise and raise and raise aggressively, and they're going to try and break Europe, because if they don't do this, the United States as a functional society will collapse if they don't do this. Because
so the idea was that they decouple from LIBOR and go on to SOFR, so that the United States, the U.S. Federal Reserve, can raise interest rates that will not have a blowback because of the offshore dollars, and therefore it would be a much softer interest rate raise insofar as the United States economy, so as not to break it. But the cost of this would be to break the European economy, and therefore the European banks and bureaucrats are freaking out because their ship is going down, but the American ship is not.
Bingo.
Okay, that's the basic argument.
That is, and I'm seeing it like everywhere I look. That's when UNCTAD called for the bailiff, which Alex led with earlier. Hey, no, please stop raising interest rates. When the Democrats, who all work for, like the Biden administration, we are literally under siege here in the United States. We are owned and operated by foreign powers, and those foreign powers are not China. They're Europe. It's old European banking money wants their frickin' colonies back. They want the help, like you said earlier. If you listen to the way these people talk, they want the Chinese to provide them the cheap goods. They want the Russians to provide them cheap oil. They want the North Africans to clean their toilets. They want the Eastern Europeans to run their computer systems and garden, and they want the Indians to make their food. Like, this is what they want. And if you listen to them talk, if you listen to Joseph Borrell talk about how the foreign minister of the EU says, hey, the EU is this perfect garden that we have to protect from the jungle. I
heard that.
Okay? This is your dead giveaway about how these fucking people think. You're the help. Shut up and do what we tell you.
Okay. No, this argument makes a hell of a lot more sense.
The British Crown and all these fucking people.
Yeah, and so basically, all of a sudden, Europe, the European financial system, and certainly the European society is adrift, and they're going down the tubes. And it's not going to be helped by the migrants, who I think are going to be the source of the social disruption that we're going to see. But that's for another conversation, or later in the conversation.
Sure, it's another conversation.
And so you're saying that basically it's the Americans decoupling from Europe. That's your basic argument, financially decoupling. Now,
I'm going to go one step further. Well, I'm going to bring up a quote that I heard recently from the Chinese foreign minister. I can never remember his name, and he was asked recently at an interview. He said, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" I think it was actually on French television or whatever, and he said, "It's too early to tell."
Oh no, that was the Vietnamese. That was it was a Vietnamese guy back in the 70s. Yeah.
Okay. So guess what?
No,
guess what? I'm saying the same. I'm saying the same thing now about. And thank you for the correction. I'm saying the same thing now about the American Revolution, The American Revolution never ended. The English have been trying to get their colonies back since the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. The history of banking in the United States, if you read Murray Rothbard, he goes over this. The history of banking in the United States is the history of the United States. And so much of what you've seen out of American foreign policy is actually British foreign policy.
Yeah.
Writ large. So now understand, with LIBOR dead, no longer having control over U.S. monetary policy, the U.S. is actually finally declaring independence, which is why Donald Trump had to be removed from power. Joe Biden had to be selected, and a Democratic majority had to be created in the House and Senate in order to push all this stuff through. Now, here's the thing that's going to bake your noodle. Ready?
Sure.
With the failure of Build Back Better, which was another CARES Act to force the Fed to monetize $6 trillion worth of debt. Now the Fed has the fiscal run room to do this, because there's no fiscal spending that they're going to have to deal with 18 months from now, because there's no mandated crazy amount of spending that they're going to have to monetize. So guess where? So this is where we bring Russia and Ukraine in. Why do you think they're pushing so hard to get the U.S. involved in a war, to get them involved in the war in Ukraine? Because they need to generate.
I always thought it was a Krugman kind of idea of, like, a big old-fashioned war will bring the American economy out of depression.
Well, it's one step further than that. It's force the Fed through war spending, blackmail, and fiscal policy to reverse interest rate hikes and create and capture and neuter the Fed, who can literally destroy these people. So strategically, if the Fed is killing them, as Daniel DiMartino Booth has been saying for weeks now, Jerome Powell is trying to do a controlled demolition of the leveraged loan market. She won't say in the offshore dollar markets. That's what I keep saying. But she won't say that because she's not allowed. Otherwise, if she said that, she would lose her access to the Fed. Okay? This is a very important point. So what he's trying to do is exactly this, and their counter move, if you think strategically, and I know you do, which is, how do you get them to pivot off of interest rate hikes? Oh, that's easy. You force another $6 trillion worth of spending on their plate. What's the one issue that's sitting in front of you that you can do that with? A false flag from the Brits to get the Americans into their just war. Yeah.
Okay, so
and that's why I'm really worried about the British and with perfidious Albion trying to create meme into existence World War III.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of okay. So you're to recap the argument, because I'm always I way back when I studied philosophy, and so I'm always trying to be very precise to understand an argument. And repeating it is the best way to do it. So what you're basically positing is that there is an internecine war between bankers, predominantly European bankers with some American participants. And on the other hand, predominantly the large banks in the United States, that on the one hand, one camp wants, sort of like a world, like a one world government, one centralized, Anglo-American oceanic kind of entity, basically Oceania. And they want one world government, IMF, UN, and they are fighting one another. In order to make that happen, the American contingent is basically deciding to torpedo the Europeans, and the European and some of the smaller American players are trying to push for an escalation of this war, so that by having to print up all kinds of money to fund a widespread war, they can they would have to. There, I kind of come to the end of the argument. They would have to what?
They have to reliquefy the offshore dollar markets, and thereby put money back into the pockets of the offshore banking system, which is the source of Europe's power. Europe's power is not in the euro markets; it's in their offshore dollar markets.
Okay, so you're basically saying that the contingent who's in control of the State Department at this time, they are basically acting not perhaps at the direct behest of, but in the interests of the European. I beg your pardon? You're useful idiots. Yeah, exactly. They are trying to force this war to widen so that it will create the liquidity necessary to save the European bacon.
And to keep capital frozen in Europe and not you got to remember there's the capital flow side to this argument as well, which is that capital flows to where it's treated best.
Right.
It also flows to where there's the most stability. So what does the European Union always try to present to the world? We are inevitable, and have everything under control.
Right.
What are we trying to produce in the What are they trying to produce in the United States? The United States is falling apart. It's on the verge of civil war. It's running around like Rambo without a jockstrap in all these places around the world. It can't even pull out of Afghanistan. It can't protect its people. It can't protect its border. It can't do any of this stuff. They're fighting on Capitol Hill. We all hate each other. Dogs and cats living together. Why would you invest in the United States?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
and guess who controls that media?
You tell me.
British Crown, Europe. Sky News, the BBC, the New York Times, Twitter was there. It was absolutely one of their biggest control organs for all of this Straussian two-step bullshit. And that goes back to the argument about the manufacturing of the energy crisis in Europe was designed in order to create an opportunity to nationalize the energy markets in Europe. Guess what? We're seeing the same thing out of Joe Biden and the Democrats. They're going to use the diesel fuel shortage here to then say we need to nationalize all the refiners because they're making too much money refining diesel fuel.
By the way, how does this fit in with the very clear sabotage that is going on in the food supply? Because one burning silo, okay, fine, but like all of these events that we're hearing all the time, the food processing plants going sky high. How does this is part of this play that you're basically saying?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Alex,
Absolutely.
I want to bring you back in because
I'm busy listening, so that's why I wasn't saying anything. But basically, I think that letting the food inflation go and causing shortages of food works it advances the control and CBDC agendas, because one day they could tell you, there are shortages of food, but here, if you want to have food available to you, then you have to, it's only going to be available in this currency. And oh, by the way, you have to have all your vaccines, and you have to have your QR code, and you have to have your, everything. So the constraining the supply of food would allow them to maybe then force people into the control matrix, because it will be the only way for you to get your food.
Sorry, okay. I have another angle on this as well. They've also stated that they want to collapse the oil-based economy. As Alex pointed out earlier, we all eat at the forbearance of converting hydrocarbons into ammonia and urea and everything else. Well, guess what? They really do want to kill off 75% of the population, because they're not going to be able to spin up enough nuclear power in the short run now, okay, to be able to support 7 billion people. They also don't want to control 7 billion people, because 7 billion people is too many. But, the world without hydrocarbons can support about 2 billion people. Now, with nuclear power, we can go with widespread nuclear power. Yeah, we can support as many people as you want. This goes back to even Julian Huxley and UNESCO and all this stuff. Like, you start talking about energy returned over energy invested, right? Which is not a great metric, right? But it's not bad. It's like GDP. GDP is a terrible metric because it's just gross national spending, but it's not bad. Let's talk about this. So oil and gas, around 75 to 80 energy returned over energy invested. That number's dropping. Uranium-238, Gen 1 light water reactors, about 80. It's about the same. This is part of the reason why we're like, why should we transfer over to nuclear when we've already got oil and gas and it's cheap? Thorium molten salt, 2,000 to 1. And thorium's everywhere. And we can build, and they're all, the thorium molten salt stuff was put on the kibosh back in the 50s, back in the 60s by the Kennedy administration, because clearly you can't get plutonium out of the uranium-233 cycle, which is thorium is just a breeder reactor process for this. By the way, just to remind everybody, I have a degree in chemistry and 25 years as a bench and research chemist. FYI,
I'm not going to dispute science. Yeah, I'm not going to dispute your bona fides.
I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that I'm not talking out my ass here. Like, I've been doing this work. I mean, dude, I did a mass balance on the oceans and partial pressure of CO2 like ages ago, and went, oh, if the temperature of the oceans rise by 1 degree from just from thermal crust venting, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would account for 90% of the CO2 we've pumped into gone into the atmosphere over the last century. So if the crust, if the Earth's position in the solar system is shifting because of the differences, because of the solar cycles, we can have a 1%, we can have a catastrophic rise in CO2 partial pressures just from venting from the oceans. Because at 33,000 feet, CO2 is a supercritical fluid. I mean, it's not even it's immense amount of CO2.
Okay, I mean,
out of the ocean.
chemistry is clearly your bailiwick, but I want to get to the here and now insofar as the issue of well, first of all, this conflict, because I've it's gone on now. I'm here in Kharkov, I'm in Ukraine, 40 miles from the front, and so of course it's on my mind, as you can imagine.
Sure.
And the escalation cycle of the Biden administration, of just more and more and doubling down. I see it more as incompetence at this point, and an inability to back off when they see that what they tried to do just failed utterly, and they just double down. Yeah. And so you're of the opinion
it's a mixture of those two things. I agree with you. I agree that they're incompetent, but they have a plan and they're executing that plan.
Okay, but they're executing it fairly incompetently, especially because they have this opposition within the financial community. So why don't they essentially take out this opposition? Wouldn't that be easier?
Because these people are just as powerful as they are. Ask yourself, the best question, the best counter to all of my arguments is, why isn't Klaus Schwab dead yet? I hate to say it, but I'm going to put it out there. In the interest of intellectual honesty, why isn't Klaus Schwab dead yet? Because the price in guillotines and rope hasn't gone up yet. I've been saying for years that I'm long guillotines and rope makers. I think that the whole thing spirals out of control very quickly once it gets to a boiling point.
Yeah, I mean, we're quickly getting to that boiling point. Okay, and it seems increasingly clear that the Americans are they're assembling an army. NATO is assembling an army on the border between Poland and Belarus. They've got some troops in Romania. I mean, they're clearly setting the stage to ramp up. But one of the big problems, of course, that they have is that they don't have the troops. And I'll tell you something that people certainly in the West don't like to hear, but the Russians are exceptionally good at war. I mean, they really know what they're doing. And a lot of people have said, oh, they've the way they've conducted the war over the past 8 months has been just disaster after disaster. From the point of view of the Russians, they have been exceptionally capable. They've totally annihilated the Zelensky regime forces with relatively minimal loss of life on their own side. And if you're comparing it like on a simplistic way, the Russians have spent half a bullet on their revolver, whereas the Zelensky regime has just shot its wad. They're out of bullets. And each of the quote unquote offensives that the Zelensky regime is carrying out, they're with fewer and fewer troops. The big pushes that they had earlier in August and September were 10,000 to 30,000 troops, and now they can barely muster 1,000 to do an offensive. I mean, they're at the end of the rope, and the Russians haven't even gotten started yet. And the American army is, they can't even fill up their recruiting quotas, right? Yeah, so they don't have what it takes to go to war. And so I'm like, I know. How is that?
This is why I really think that the Biden administration has been pursuing a demolition strategy on the United States. The one thing we don't want to see is that moment where the United States military is proven to be not particularly good. And Gonzalo, my partner in the newsletter, Dexter White, is one of those people who firmly believes that the Russians have cocked this war up left, right, and center. And I argue with him about now hear me out. I don't necessarily agree with him, but I do listen to him very carefully because he does have very good and specific knowledge about military capabilities and weapon systems and all this stuff. That's his thing. Like, he can't help it.
Sure.
And he's a very smart guy with a lot of real.
So what is his argument? Is saying that
I think his argument is that Putin is hoping. I was waiting for Kamina to do her thing. Hoping for a negotiated settlement. Clearly,
he does
believe that the escalation here is what he's most worried about is that there's a gap right now. There's a gap in proportional response, right? So if the Russians were to escalate further, if the Brits were to do something irretrievable, right? And yes, and not even Nord Stream 2, not even the Kerch Strait Bridge, not even, you know, the things that we've seen so far have been irretrievable. Putin's been able to rein in the political backlash against these things happening, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but if the next false flag forces his hand, and so much of what they're doing, what the Brits are thinking strategically, is to take away his non-military options, take away all of his economic levers, right? To continue the war of attrition, because Putin's fighting this war on multiple fronts, and I think that he's done a credible job. Me personally, I think he's done a credible job in almost every theater. Okay. The key here is that if we have to go to a next stage of escalation, the Russians have something that the Americans do not have, which is battlefield nukes, meaning sub-kiloton nuclear weapons. To really, you know, we have the Moab, which is a 44-ton bomb. They have
mother of all bombs.
They have dozens or hundreds of battlefield nukes that they can literally wipe out what's left of the Ukrainian army in any massed force. I think the acknowledgement of the Americans being in Ukraine, overseeing weapons transfers, are just tripwire troops at this point. That scares me to death, dude. Like, I'm scared to death.
I think that they announced that because they have to start explaining why they have dead Americans getting shipped back home, because the Americans have been here since the get-go. And because they've been operating the M777s and the HIMARS, because those weapon systems take several months, if not years, to learn how to operate properly. It's not the deficiency of the Ukrainian soldier; it's simply a matter of time. And so those weapon systems have been operated by American troops, and now those dead men are being shipped back, and somebody has to start explaining how that happened. And so that's why they announced this, because now they're going to have a credible excuse as to why they have dead American troops going back to the United States. But no, the issue of this escalation, the Russians have gone about this very slowly and methodically insofar as this war is concerned, and they've succeeded pretty much on all fronts. The latest credible estimate is that the Russians, including DPR and LPR forces, have lost not more than 15,000 men killed, compared to at least 120,000 dead on the Zelensky regime, and probably twice that number of wounded, incapacitated. I mean, it's kind of like a minor miracle that the Zelensky regime forces have not collapsed already. The only reason that they're still fighting is because there are disciplinary units at the front. And that's all I'm going to say at this point, because my situation here is a bit precarious, but you can pretty much figure out what that means. Now, the issue insofar as, you know, geopolitically of where this goes, it's very clear that the Brits especially want to escalate this at all costs. And so you're saying that Boris Johnson, when he went in April to tell Zelensky not to agree to the negotiations, because they were actually, by the end of March, they were very close to a negotiated settlement. All of this, and Boris Johnson himself went in very early April to tell Zelensky to his face not to agree to any kind of ceasefire. You're saying that basically all of this push, especially by the Brits, is because of financial reasons.
Not all of it. Not all of it. But it's part of the dimension. Alex, you take it from here. I'm going to go. I'll be right back. So, all right.
Sure. Alex?
I think, Gonzalo, I think that, you know, ultimately one of the things that is undeniably emerges from all of these events is that we're dealing with the vestiges of the British Empire. And so the ideological and ultimately the control headquarters are still in London. And the strategy of the British Empire, and I'm not talking about British Empire as in being anything seriously to do with Britain. This is now more a structure of vested interests that are associated with the international banking cartel, and banking and finance is their main levers of control. Basically, their strategy for more than 100 years, well, 200 years, but it has been formulated explicitly for the first time by Halford Mackinder in 1904. The famous heartland theory. Who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland. Who controls the heartland controls the world island. World island being Eurasian landmass. And so, in multiple iterations, they explain why. From Halford to Brzezinski to today's State Department, basically they explicitly state that the number one imperative of the foreign policy is to preserve domination over Eurasian landmass and to prevent any rival or a combination of rivals that could prevent them from exercising hegemony in Eurasian over Eurasian landmass. And so now that is happening. It's Russia and China, right? These rivals that can actually credibly push back against the empire and conduct independent policy. And so the purpose of war in Ukraine is again the brainchild of the British Empire, and the objective is to destroy first Russia and then China, and to again bludgeon them into submission. There's even explicitly stated goals that they want to break Russia into 5 little Russias or more.
Yeah,
depending on who you ask. So I think that if they lose Ukraine, it's game over, right? And so in every which way they can, they need to keep their foothold there, because it's Russia's soft underbelly. It's the way that they can keep Russia in a quagmire that doesn't need to be won. It just has to continue. And so if you send a token 5,700 US troop to the border of Ukraine, you're not going to win a war with that.
No.
But you might be able to extend it. You might be able to use them as a tripwire to expand the conflict. You might be able to get the Poles and the Romanians and maybe some Bulgarians involved. It's just a way to keep the war going and to maybe play for time until you can weaken Russia, until you can see Vladimir Putin regime overturned, replaced him with some Juan Guaido, and get Russia back to where it was when it was under Boris Yeltsin. And while it was under Boris Yeltsin, it was completely dominated by Western financial interests. And the reason the finance plays into this is because Eurasian landmass is where you have 70% of the world population, where you have 70% of global energy reserves, where you have 2/3 of global GDP, most of the world's resource wealth, and many profitable corporate entities with low debt that you could leverage up to the hill. And all of this is money good collateral that, if it's dominated by the Western financial system, can float it up and extend its shelf life. But it has to be militarily controlled. It has to be dominated by force, because when the Iranians are developing their new natural gas hubs in the north and connecting it over the Caucasus region, planning big pipelines towards Europe, you have Iranian and Russian and Chinese corporations developing that, and Chinese and Russian financial institution financing that. That's their collateral. But if you dominated that, you'd have Royal Dutch Shell, you'd have ExxonMobil in there, you'd have HSBC all over that, you have Royal Bank of Scotland, whatever, you'd have Western banks, and it will be their collateral. So I think that is the logic of empire, is destroying rivals. I think they've already lost. I mean, as we speak now, Olaf Scholz is on the way to China, or he's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, Scholz has been running German foreign policy independent of Annalena Baerbock. She's throwing a tantrum. And I just yesterday, I mean, these are events of huge significance. Just yesterday, apparently Erdogan went on Turkish TV, gave an interview in which he said, like, oh yeah, Olaf Scholz totally changed his mind. He's trying to find a common language with Vladimir Putin and find ways to work with Russia again. So we're gonna see tremendous changes going on in Europe. I think that Germany is on the verge of pivoting to Eurasian integrations world. And I think that there's going to be tremendous pressure to get rid of Olaf Scholz. But if they don't succeed, because Olaf Scholz, there's been 100 German corporations who have petitioned to accompany Scholz to China as part of the delegation, and they were able to only take on 12. But these are industrial interests. And they now make a common front with the labor unions of Germany, and they all want to trade with China because their trade with China has been growing by leaps and bounds, very significant amounts. And for Germany now, this is not just a nice thing to have. This is a matter of survival. And if you make nice with China, and if you find constructive relationship with China, that's kind of already they're gently pushing you to find constructive solutions with Russia. And so, Germany is the point of pivoting. Turkey has already pivoted.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have these extremely effective military strikes in Russia that are crippling Ukraine's energy systems. To the point that Ukrainian,
I know it.
yeah, you know it, but the effect of it, as you also know, is going to be there's going to be another wave of immigrants from Ukraine heading for Poland and Germany, and they're going to be owning them, and they're already past capacity.
Oh yeah.
Big things are going to be happening, and if World War III doesn't erupt, which I think is unlikely too, then I think that this Davos crowd World Economic Forum agenda is going to crumble, and probably in short order. I'm not talking about next week, but probably next year or 2 or 3. They had it marked for 2. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that there's a phenomenon that I've been reading about recently, which is called extinction burst. It's a psychological moment when the things that have worked for you before no longer work. So you double down and become more and more hysterical before you finally realize that it's over. Okay, it's basically like it actually comes from childhood development, where a child, you try to just discipline a small child, of course, and he throws a tantrum and you give in. He throws a tantrum and you give in, and finally say, okay, no more. I'm not giving in anymore. And the child throws a tantrum that becomes a mega nuclear meltdown, insofar as children are concerned, of course. And finally they give up the ghost and like, okay. It seems that the people pushing for this are coming to that moment of hysteria. And my great concern is that in their hysteria, in this extinction burst that this particular crowd is climbing towards, that they might do something irretrievable, such as starting a war.
I think if it were up to them, they already would have done so. But you have a command and control hierarchy that has to execute all these bits of their agenda. And so even if at the top of the hierarchy where you have people that come in front of cameras, that give press releases, that give statements, to the press, they are long on ideology and short on competence. But as you go down the levels of hierarchy, you find people who are much less zealous about ideology and much higher on competence, and who have a better understanding of the consequences of those actions, and who then push back. And like if somebody tells them, right, let's put together this dirty bomb and let's have a false flag attack on Nikolaev or Odessa or whatever, somebody's going to say like, whoa, this is a really bad idea, and they're going to leak the information to the Russians. They're going to alert somebody.
The Russians last week, as a matter of fact, Shoigu last weekend, he went on and talked to all the secretaries of defense, or equivalent thereof, ministers of defense of France, UK, US, Turkey, and told them this is coming down and we want no part of it, and you better not do it or else. I mean, put the fear of God into them,
Exactly. So, somebody in their desperate attempt to preserve the status quo, or to get their toys back, to get their empire back, and make things as they once were, could be capable of very desperate acts and very unscrupulous, dirty games.
Yeah.
But they're not acting in isolation. There's opposition. There's even inner opposition. Not everybody agrees, and not everybody wants to have part with that. So I think that for sure what you're suggesting is sloshing in the heads of Kagans or Newlands of this world, and people like that. People populating the halls of MI6 and MI5 and whatnot. But they, it's very difficult for them to get these things done. They would have to get very unlucky, and we would have to get very unlucky. They would have to get very lucky, and we very unlucky.
Yeah, a quick parenthesis to chat, guys who are subscribers to my Patreon. I posted the link for you guys to join. I posted it a few minutes ago. You're more than welcome to, because I'm not going to keep my guests much longer, and I'd be very interested in hearing questions from the audience. Just so that you know, that the link is up on the Patreon. I edited the last post, and it has the link to join. So if you want to join now, or forever hold your peace. So Tom, you want to make a point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Alex is completely right about all this, and the one like finger we haven't quite pointed in all this is the British Crown.
Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry, I can't quite hear you. Can you speak up a little?
I'm sorry, I forgot to put my mic back on my chest. The better.
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I forgot to put the mic back on.
No problem.
So no, the one thing we didn't name in all of this is the British Crown, which is Alex's. Again, it's another angle that Alex has helped me to make a point about. And remember, all of this financial stuff, don't forget, the British Crown still has tremendous amount of wealth. They have the ability to bomb and move capital markets at a whim, and all the rest of this stuff. Alex's points about Germany pivoting are really, really interesting. And my only worry about this is that, remember, Davos has done a wonderful job of ensuring that the Greens have the hammer over all German policy, because they control a vast majority of the German upper house, not just the German lower house. They control the Bundesrat. Because remember, for those of you in the audience who don't understand or don't know this, I don't know if you've talked about this in the past, but the German Bundesrat votes by state as a collective group. So Rhineland-Westphalia votes as a block. If the Greens control one out of the 7 votes that they have, and the Greens hold their nose and throw a tantrum, they have veto power over the entire states' votes. So when you're looking at the makeup of the German Bundesrat, this is why Merkel was so adamant that AfD would never get any, would be allowed to have any votes within the German state governments. Very important about the German state coalitions and all those German state elections, because they were all manipulated to create a fake majority of the Greens, who were an instrument of, international globalist power structure. So, that's why the Greens can have 18% of the German Bundesrat, the Bundestag, the lower German house, but they control 2/3 now or more. I haven't looked at it recently, but it's well more than the majority, and that's all they need. And so that is going to slow down any potential pivot. And it's going to really gum up the works of any potential pivot at a political level, unless there's and so even if you change the German government, right? Because of it's going to be the German state election cycle over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. That's going to be really, really, really important to watch, because if you start to see the big one's going to be if Olaf Scholz is breaking ranks, then it also means, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say, I think it also means that the CDU is also shifting, and we may see a complete realignment in German politics over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. I think the Germans are the most in the most precarious position, but they're also the most locked down. Now, let's talk about Italy and let's talk about Turkey's pivot real quick before we go. And I'm happy to take questions from the audience. But one last point: the call for the gas hub into Turkey to make Turkey the gas hub is a big deal. You want to know you want to know who the big winner is? Italy. Why? Because all that gas that's going to come up from Iran, is going to come up from Saudi Arabia, is going to come in from the Caspian and down from Russia, is going to go in through the gas hub in Turkey and in through and enter into the southern portion of Europe, and then be redistributed north. Whereas Nord Streams 1 and 2 were always a German political operation to control European gas flow from Germany west. It points east and south. Okay, this is an important point. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they mentioned that over something like 30%, of the equivalent of 30% of Italy's gas needs are sitting capped on wells that have been drilled and are ready to go, and because of EU sanctions and EU regulations, can't be moved on. And this is clearly the Germans trying to starve the Italians.
Yeah.
Now I think that the American faction I've identified is actually behind the ouster of Mario Draghi and the
Well, I got the word on Mario Draghi. No, he wasn't ousted. He knew what was coming and wanted no part of it. He didn't want to get the blame. He exited of his own accord. I got that word from a fairly reputable source. Anyway, we're going to take questions. Here is against Neocon Arendt. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, thank you so much. I have super briefly, as quick as I can, if you invite comments on just a couple points. One is touching on motivation. We've had, I think you, Gonzalo, mentioned incompetence and cui bono. And here's a suggestion: when we're dealing with fuckers as insane as these people, you can't just ask cui bono, because we're talking about eugenicists, right? So this is super crazy. I was really struck by the part of of Tom's contrast of the different motivations, and it's very interesting to me that if you've got the Greeks and the Italians with no love lost with the Germans, and the ongoing American Revolution, it's interesting to me that at the 100 years ago, WASP culture was much more predominant in the United States, and eugenicism was a source in the United States, in Germany, and in England. Those were the sources. That was Huxley. And so it's interesting to me that contrast may be alive. I'm not to imply that anyone here watches CNBC, but that moment yesterday or the day before where Jim Krainer said today, like literally now, that the government should be mandating, using propaganda to force the vaccines, and his co-host sat there stunned. I was wondering if there was any comments on Wall Street, on divisions within Wall Street, reflective of what Tom is talking about. And then one final invitation to comment is, I think Tom has generally been encouraging us not to freak out too much, and even not to freak out too much about the project of central bank digital currencies. And I'm kind of nervous about the whole Bitcoin thing. I think it's a ruse. And so I wonder about the importance of local currencies and the need to have local currencies. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
So great comment, great questions. One, I think Jim Kramer is a clown, and he speaks for the people who pull his strings.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's.
No, I don't think anybody pulls his strings. I think he's just a flat out idiot. You know. He's
Oh no, I think
entertaining.
he stays in. I think he stays on CNBC because he knows exactly what he's allowed to say and what he's not allowed to say. And I think he's as regime. I think he's as regime controlled as anybody else. And as far as Bitcoin is concerned, I think Bitcoin's not a ruse. I've studied it from literally the day it went live. You're talking to somebody who mined one of the early blocks on an old computer. For Christ's sake, I've been in Bitcoin a long time, and I know the people who were there at the beginning. So, what I'll tell you is this: local currencies, getting local, community, all that stuff, absolutely a very important counter to all this. Bitcoin and other proof of work style coins can operate in that space. And if we're, and if they want to take the trappings of modern society away from us, well, I don't know about you, but I got a bag of junk silver. I've got a big stack of every. I still do a lot of business in cash, and so I have, a whole cigar box full of dimes, quarters, nickels, and pennies, just in case if I need them or not. So don't. By the way, don't discount any of that stuff. The way we get around these people is, as Alex said earlier, it's all about finding and keeping your local economy running. People ask me all the time, where should they invest? I'm like, do you have a tool and die shop in town? Maybe you should think about investing in it.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Tom, Chad has asked, what cigar are you smoking?
Oh, right now this is just a JR alternative. Earlier I smoked a really nice Gurkha Colorado. So
okay. The Spy Guy, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Hey there.
Okay, hi. Thanks for letting me in.
By the way.
Yeah. Hey, Tom. First off, Gonzalo, I'll explain to you this whole Davos thing the way I figured it out. It's basically like the Communist International of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. A bunch of nut jobs and crazy people writing papers until they get hold of Russia and then start implementing their nutso ideas. Tom, I just was hoping you could explain some of the stuff I've talked to you about, what's going on in Canada. Yeah. So Gonzalo doesn't realize it's not quite as screwed up as he thinks it is. Thanks. Bye.
Sure.
Thank you, Spy Guy. Take it easy.
Yeah, great question. He and I have chatted privately about this because he's got connections within the Canadian Conservative Party, and they're quite important. And the Bank of Canada and the Canadian banks are not on board with. They're trying to oust Justin Trudeau in the same way that our banks are trying to get rid of Joe Biden and the junta. By the way, that's why the Bank of Canada has been aggressively raising rates. That's why they were able to get the Canadian Senate to tell Trudeau, no, you're not going to implement the Emergencies Act. Remember, the Canadian Senate is kind of like the House of Lords. It's usually just a rubber stamp tool. And the fact that the Canadian Senate stood up and said no to Justin Trudeau was a watershed moment in Canadian political history. Okay, and I haven't talked about this very much, but I've talked about it here and there. But yeah, this is a very, very important point. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make it here on this particular forum. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for answering those questions. And by the way, to my Patreon subscribers, nobody else is coming on, and the link is there. Like I said, I think that people are shy, or perhaps it's just a bad time insofar as their scheduling is concerned, because it was sort of like
I think they must be intimidated.
No. Dude, we're really open. Come on in. I used to take questions all the time on my live streams. Everybody in the audience that used to follow my live streams knows that. I'll do Q&A for
while we wait for question, Tom, what I wanted to mention is that it seems that on the subject of Germany, it seems that there's been a lot of grumbling in German politics about Olaf Scholz kind of usurping Germany's foreign policy and running things as an autocrat. And Annalena Baerbock was in where was she? In Tajikistan, in Kyrgyzstan? I don't remember. Just the other day, maybe yesterday. and she like laid into him. And she criticized him, and she was saying about the trip to China, which should be her domain, right? She's the foreign minister.
Yep.
She's not going. That, Germany needs to have a more bolder, more assertive policy versus China, all that stuff, human rights, pressure China. China is now a systemic rival, she's saying. I mean, all this nonsense, all this like neocon nonsense of like, now we're going to lecture China about foreign policy and human rights and this and that. And he's not having any of that. So, I know that, she's the Green Taliban. The Green Taliban are very powerful in German policy, but it somehow
That's their name, man. You don't hear me contradicting you.
Somehow it seems that there's things are running differently. I don't know what it is, but all this grumbling is happening for
empire. Look, the way I view it is, I believe that World War III started on February 24th, and what we're experiencing, what we're living through, is the death throes of an empire, of just, like I said, extinction blast. I mean, they're just completely freaking out and trying to hold on to the power that they had in the 90s. I think that's basically it. They have a nostalgia for the 90s when everything was going their way, and they're desperately trying to replicate it by bullying and force instead of doing the smart play, as far as I'm concerned, which is to cooperate.
I'll go you one better, Gonzalo. I think World War III started when Russia reunified with Crimea.
Yeah.
Because at that point, then we went on then we got the bombing of the oil markets, the attempted the massive attack on the ruble. You heard. I mean, I can go into that, and then Russia moves into Syria. I said, look, this is going to start the process of people finally saying, you know what? Oh my God, we can stand up to these people.
Yeah,
and we can win, and. That's a part of what I was saying about the New York banks and Trump, when they were able to get control of the megaphone a little bit.
So
it was really cool, because at that moment they saw their opportunity to start implementing policy that would give them the tools necessary to fight in the international financial space that they didn't have previously by finally implementing SOFR. Look. There's a reason why, by the way, and Pamela, I'll get to in just a second. There's a reason why Kamala Harris and John McCain high-fived on the floor of the Senate when they blocked Judy Shelton's appointment to the Federal Reserve, because Judy Shelton is an old gold bug, and they wanted her on the Federal Reserve we'll have to do another hour on that subject alone. But I'm not dead serious. I don't want to get to this, but that was important, and they did not want John Williams as the head of the New York Fed, because they knew he was going to implement SOFR. They ran story after story in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the Financial Crimes, all those fucking places about how terrible this guy would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, this is a different John Williams from Shadow Stats.
Yes, this is a different guy. Yes.
Yeah. Pamela, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. I muted you before because you had your there was getting a lot of feedback. What's up? What's on your mind?
Excellent show.
Thank you.
I was just curious what these gentlemen think. Do both sides, the American bankers that are in contrast with the Europeans and stuff, do you think they have equal power?
I'm going to let Alex.
Alex?
I couldn't hear the whole question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
Pamela's feet cut out.
Pamela, are you still there? You want to repeat your question?
I was wondering if you think the American bankers that are, conflicting with the Europeans and stuff have equal power. Do they have the ability to fight them?
I think they do, and I will ask Tom Luongo to correct me if I'm wrong, but you have unified strategy in New York and Washington. Well, not foreign policy of the United States, but at least the monetary policy of the Fed. You have a unified group with discernible self-interest and discernible adversaries and rivals, and they know what they're doing. In Europe, you have a gaggle of chihuahuas fighting between themselves, and their strategy, I think, is in the la land of fantasy. Like they're living in the dystopian sci-fi fiction movie, and they're trying to bring about that reality. Whereas I think that the American bankers are firmly with their feet on the ground and understanding where the money is coming from, how it's made, and what an economy should be.
Do you think
So I think by
do you think they're not as evil, but you think the outcome of them succeeding will be evil in a different way? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I if it weren't for this conflict, where you have like King Kong killing the Godzilla, I wouldn't think of either side as being the good side, and I wouldn't, think that American bankers are the nice guy, the white hats. But let's say at this juncture, they are perhaps the most credible force confronting the old European degenerate elites.
Correct.
And that
By the
have
way,
the power to.
I would
Yeah, go
concur
ahead,
with that.
Tom.
That's
Alex,
really.
I just wanted to follow up with that. Do you think which of these two sides wants a war, an open war?
The European side.
And
Absolutely.
the Americans are against the war, or are they just indifferent to a war, but they don't want to have their shit screwed up too badly?
I think that war is not in everybody. They understand that this war, with potential for nuclear weapons and all of the rest of it, I think is just way too. That's not a risk that they can bracket for, right? That's not a risk that they can plan for. At the end of the day, no, I don't think Jamie Dimon is a good guy. Okay,
No.
I clearly don't think that. I'm only ever trying to analyze people and their motivations and their incentives, as Alex just pointed out. So the best way to look at this is that I would rather have these guys fighting amongst themselves, and all I'm trying to do as the ant, they got giants fighting, and I'm an ant. I'm trying not to get stepped on.
Correct.
And then I'm hoping that guy wins because he'll be weakened enough later on, and I know what the tools are to take him down. I don't have tools to deal with what like Klaus Schwab. The way I like to put it is Minority Report, but with more Germans. Okay, replace the precogs with AI, and that's what they're going to do. And they're going to squash any and all potential resistance through predictive algorithmic, culling of dissidents. That's how they're going to do this, and that's how they think they're going to maintain this. The Diamond and Company just want their VIG. Okay, they just want their 2%. They just want their 2 or 3% that they make on that's guaranteed. They want their one-way trade, whatever that's going to be, right? Their real net 2 or 3%, not the nominal 12 or 15 or 20%, but the nominal, the real, after adjusted for inflation and all the bullshit. They just want their VIG. They're just gangsters, but they're gangsters that understand that that the source of the gangsters' power is that you still have to provide good protection services for the community and you want your VIG for that protection service.
Right.
That's how you have to think of the New York bankers and the people that I'm talking about. And if you get that, they understand that we still need to have oil, we still have gas. Remember, go back to that meeting, that video recently with Jamie Dimon making the power hands at Rashida Tlaib going, and she's going, "Are you going to continue to invest in ESG and stop these things?" Like, no, because that would usher in, that would put the United States on the road to hell. Mm-hmm. And by the way, with the power hands, like, dude, I got news for you. Jamie Dimon has this under control. I spoke at an investor conference over the weekend in Miami, doing mostly this shtick. And I sat and I chatted with some of the people who were there, all ultra high net worth investors and people who were close to this. Mm-hmm. And they all confirm what I said. They're like, no, you're absolutely on target with all of this. You have identified the break points. You've identified what's going on here. And oh, by the way, I'll take it one step further, which I'm not going to go into now. But it's even better, right? But there's the way I look at this as an amateur poker player, the Fed is holding aces. They just flopped their set, and Europe is on an inside straight draw. And they don't even realize that if they make their inside straight, that they're already dominated because it will give the Fed the overvote. If you guys know what I'm talking about in terms of
no, I don't. I don't play
meaning
poker.
That if they get their straight, then it's going to give the Fed a friggin' full house, basically. And then they can. And then, by the way, at that moment, it doesn't matter. Even if you get their straight, you still have which beats three of a kind. Got news for you. I still have the boat. I win. They have multiple ways of getting out of this problem that the Europeans don't have. The Europeans' only way out of this is to force the Fed to pivot, is to force the Americans to go into war spending and jack debt to GDP to 200 and 300% like we did during World War II. That's their only way out. Okay.
Is there any other players involved other than the BRICS? I mean, like, is there any other party that could get us out of this dystopian nightmare?
Oh, no, I think here's one that'll really blow your mind. I honestly believe that, and I say this without any credible evidence, but I honestly believe that the way I've described it is this. Ready? You've got Powell on the one side draining the Europeans of the dollars they need, and you got Putin on the other side draining them of the energy you need. And Europe's the rag doll, and Powell and Putin are going, ready? Pull. That's it. It's that simple. And I honestly believe that there is some tacit coordination here. Because here's something one of my patrons dug up for me. Ready? The only custodian in U.S. dollars, the only custodian for Russian equities in the global in the global markets right now, is guess who? It's J.P. Morgan. Meaning J.P. Morgan's the only one with the ruble liquidity to be able to trade and or settle trades in Russian stocks, for fuck's sake. They've got them by the fucking balls.
Good.
I mean, I can't fucking. When one of my patrons posted this up on my private Slack server like a month ago, I went, "Holy shit! What the fuck are you talking about?" I'm like, and it's right there. It's right there. Bank of New York Mellon killed off all the U.S. ADRs of the Russian ADRs of Gazprom, Lukoil, and all the rest of it. And guess who 100% controls the Russian equity market in the West? It's J.P. Morgan.
Wow.
Oh, and here's another one.
I had no idea.
I didn't know this either. I never came up in our previous conversations, Alex. I meant to tell you about this. Moreover, as I pointed out to you in the last the podcast you and I did together on my podcast, the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast, which is that same patron did a genealogical deep dive into Jerome Powell. Guess who Jerome Powell's 8th generation descended from? The Virginia aristocracy that were the people behind the American Revolution.
Really?
Yeah, he's that guy. Yeah. You think he's a race trader? After everything you've seen so far, after everything we presented, I don't think so.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. That really is fascinating, and I think that you and I talked about this, Tom, on one of your podcasts, because I kind of asked you, like, who is Tom Powell, Jay Powell?
And
then you told me the story, and I was like,
Okay, so he's a wasp.
Guys, this is the best. This is what I love about this. I just want to say one thing. What I love about these forums, about having Patreons and having these things, that we have the ability to crowdsource our own research. Yeah. I have nearly 2,500 patrons now. And we sit on a private Slack server, private discussion forum, working out a lot of this stuff in real time. So much of what you hear from me, some of it is mine, no argument. But some of it is given to me by people who are in the know and are close to things, and they want to chat with me, and we work this stuff out in real time. I always say, you may be the smartest guy in the room, Klaus Schwab. He's not, but let's just assume that he is. But you're not smarter than the room. And rooms like this one are multiplying like fucking yeast in sugar, making wine. And that's what's going on here. And they can't stop that, no matter how much they try.
Let me just
Brilliant.
ask. Well, I just wanted to make a statement. I want to ask one more question, but do you think they'll start offing people? The
There's one after
European.
Imran Khan this morning.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm asking. Like, do you think?
Oh,
they're-
we're clearly in the just fucking
Killing,
start
killing
killing them
murder.
phase. Like that's where we are.
Yeah,
Clearly, we've been
yeah.
there for
Well,
weeks.
I mean, they killed Nord Stream, which I was like,
What?
holy
Wait, what was
shit.
this about Imran Khan?
They
They
shot him.
shot that. Someone
today.
tried to assassinate Imran Khan yesterday during a rally.
Yeah.
He's
He got
okay.
shot in the leg.
Yeah, he got
The
shot in the
guy
leg,
missed,
but he's okay.
thankfully.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his
But he's alive.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
alive.
yes.
He's fine.
He's
Thankfully,
alive.
they didn't get the femoral artery.
But it's
Thankfully, he
getting
didn't bleed out.
outrageous. And also the whole thing with the threat to Saudi Arabia from Iran. What a bunch of horseshit that is. But I think, however,
No, it is. The Saudis and the
is.
Iranians have been talking for 2 years. They've been coordinating. They're coordinating the end of Yemen and all the rest of it for 2 years.
Yeah,
That was all bullshit.
they're meeting in Vienna just about all the time. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
Yeah,
who is? Wait, what?
The
I'm
Saudis
just-
and the Iranians have been
Saudis
meeting
and
in
the
Vienna
Iranians.
for 2 years.
yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah. They've been meeting for a long time because
Mhm.
MBS, he's a very ruthless man, but very clever, and he understands the future, and he
Well,
understands
what do you
that
think that whole thing
Iran
was
is.
about? What was that about? The threat. What's
My thinking is that it's the Americans are trying to gin up some sort of excuse so that they can actually stage a coup d'état in Saudi Arabia. I think that
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is on their
Oh.
list of naughty countries, and
Yes.
MBS, they hate him. They hate him.
Oh
with
yeah,
a
they
passion.
despise him.
Yeah,
They
and
want to
because-
put MBZ back in control.
Yeah, and because MBS, Mohammed bin Salman is he's a very shrewd operator, very ruthless, but he understands the future and he understands who he should be friends with, and they don't like who he's becoming friends with. He's very close with Putin. Not close, but you know what I mean, relatively speaking. I mean,
In
friendly with
geopolitics, no one's friends.
No
You're all-
one's
you're all
friendly,
just temporary allies.
yeah, but they understand how each other is very useful. And MBS has been pushing for dialogue with Iran because their interests align, and also MBS is very conscious of the fact that he will be alive when Saudi oil essentially runs out.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
but
so-
in the American news, it was saying that it seemed like Saudi Arabia was going along with this whole threat thing, but maybe that's false. Is that false?
That yeah, absolutely.
It's
Probably.
rubbish.
That's the British. That's the classic British MI6 spin.
Yeah, okay. And then the last thing I will get off, but the last thing I want to say is, Gonzalo, I think that you're wonderful and lovely. However,
I know I'm so sexy. I tell my chat every episode that I'm the sexiest podcaster or roundtable guy that you'll know.
I agree that they're incompetent because I think that it's all nepotism and they're all on drugs and they're just, like you said, spoiled brats. However, they have an evil pleasure in seeing everyone suffer.
Yes.
And they have
sadistic
long-range
streak,
plans for the suffering.
Yeah.
So that's not only stupidity, that's planned. It's
No,
sick.
they clearly don't recognize, Pamela, any restraints on their behavior because they don't believe in God. They don't believe in anything.
Right.
They
No,
believe in power.
that
They believe in themselves.
They believe that all other people on this earth are here to serve them
Yes.
and to be sacrificed for their benefit. That's what
We
they
are the
basically
help.
believe. Yeah, not even the help.
But
because
they
at least,
plan it. They plan and come up with schemes to
I don't.
make people suffer.
I'm always suspicious about plans because plans never work out. Okay.
Right.
I always think that it's more
unintended
improvised,
consequences.
more like jazz, more like they're playing the notes that they have in front of them and playing them as best they can, but towards very cruel and frankly sadistic ends. I mean,
Yes.
that's ultimately what I believe is in their hearts.
I just think they're bad jazz musicians. I've listened to a lot of bad diatonic jazz in my life, and are we talking about are we talking about John Coltrane level jazz or the Spyro Gyra? Because
Spyro Gyra.
I think it's Spyro Gyra because these people don't have any fucking soul. So
no, because I heard what's his name, Harari, that guy who wrote that book Homo Do or whatever it was called, who is actually like the executive assistant to Klaus Schwab, and he was saying outright that that all that the majority of the population of the world is filler, and that should be just basically eliminated. I mean, he's just some bloodthirsty crazy man. I mean, just real evil shit coming out of that guy's
I
mouth.
know.
Yeah,
I
but
know.
if you listen to Harari carefully, you'll also discover that he's unbelievably stupid.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah.
the stuff he says is so incoherent.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where they found him and how they made him into the
He's a
the
good
ideological.
He's a good bullshitter.
Yeah, no, he's a bad bullshitter.
Well, no, he's a
I-
bad bullshitter to people who have a little bit of common sense, but to many people, and these people aren't smart. That's the thing that I keep insisting, that nobody ever believes me.
They
Look,
are not smart.
I don't want to
really
sound like
not
No, they're
smart.
not
right?
smart. They're twisted.
What I like to do, though, guys, is I like to say, I like to give them always the benefit of the doubt. They have
Why?
nothing. I'd rather argue that they think. Well, actually, the best way to put it is that they think they're smart.
Yeah,
They may
Well,
not
yeah.
actually be smart.
exactly.
Okay, but
Exactly.
the way I like to look at
Yeah.
them is they think they're smart. They think they're smarter than us. They're better than us, and then they're really just a bunch of inbred pieces of shit. And
Exactly, but they're still pulling strings, and this
course.
I can't comprehend.
Yeah.
well, it's because they
Yeah.
still have the message. They still have the vestiges of power, and they still have the vestiges of the systems that they've built. And I've been saying for years, and I know you guys, this is the first time I've been on this show with you guys, but I've been saying for years that I've always thought that they had to take their shot now because they are at the height of their control system. All
Yes.
the people that they have all the compromat on,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Pelosi and Leahy and all the rest of them, they're all in place, and they're all 82.
Yeah.
And they're all like, and so they have to
Oh,
make their shot now.
parenthetically, about the Paul Pelosi thing. That was a
Gosh.
gay encounter that went wrong.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I think.
Yes.
I mean, the best meme I saw was, here's the best argument why Paul Pelosi is gay, and this is this awful picture of Nancy. I'm like, yeah, if that's not going to turn you gay, I don't know what is. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, Donald Trump Jr.'s comment. I'm not like a big Trumpster or anything, but Donald Trump Jr.'s. Did you see the feather boa comment? The
No.
red feather boa.
Oh God.
That was hysterical. Everybody knows it was a gay encounter.
Oh,
No
yeah.
question about it. No
Yeah,
question.
and that's why they're not releasing the footage,
Exactly.
the
Of course
police
not.
cam footage, because they know what it shows.
They're
Yeah.
degenerate. These
Yes,
people
they are.
Beyond
degenerate.
Yeah,
Beyond.
yes, they are.
I have been telling myself I need to rewatch Eyes Wide Shut again.
Yeah, yeah.
But I watched, but here's even better. I rewatched The Shining recently, and The Shining was Kubrick's first attempt to try and tell us that these people are degenerates.
Yes,
Because
that was a great movie.
that's the ghosts in The Shining are the degenerates, and it's all embedded within The Shining. And once you understand that, all the like weird conspiracy theories about what The Shining actually means, it comes down to it's Davos versus Jack, and Jack's been seduced by these degenerate ghosts.
Yeah.
It's all it is.
Pamela, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Anything
And
else?
Alex, I wasn't familiar with you, but you're a joy also. So I'm happy. I'm going to look for your link and follow you. And Tom, I've been reading you for years.
Thanks.
So you're
Thank
great.
you very much, Pamela.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Alex
Gentlemen.
is the man,
Thank
isn't he? He really
Take care,
is.
Pamela. Thanks very much for your support. I appreciate it. We're going to get to Jane in just a moment. I just want to reiterate that we're going to have the links to both Tom and Alex as soon as the broadcast is over, because I didn't get it from them. And guys, just email me your links and I'll be sure to put them up in the description so people can check out your work.
Will do.
Jane, how's it going? Jane, you there? Jane. I think that she might be away from her mic for just a moment. Let's give her a little bit of time to come back.
Sure,
on.
no problem. Take your time. I'm
Um,
going to email you now, Gonzalo, while we're sitting here chatting.
Sure, no problem. Because there's Jane and there's nobody else, so we have to wait for Jane. But no, the Paul Pelosi. I mean, this is just a prurient interest, I suppose. But it's just so damn funny, the whole Paul Pelosi thing. Because they tried desperately to spin it that he was like the guy who beat him up or hammered him or whatever. Was some MAGA guy, and they started digging into the background. He's all kinds of weird. He's basically a prostitute. The other one that I've always found very amusing is Emmanuel Macron. He's a twink. He's just literally a Rothschild's twink. And what I'm finding kind of fascinating and disturbing is that all of the people that they have in leadership positions are all fronts for somebody else. You have senile people such as, there's Jane. Jane, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I wasn't expecting to be called on. I'm just listening in. I
okay, great.
follow your broadcast with great interest, but I don't have anything to add. I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. But you don't have any question? You have Tom and Alex at your disposal, or if you want to ask me anything, feel free.
Well, how are you doing? I thought maybe you wouldn't have any electricity with all of those.
Yeah, I'm very surprised myself, to tell you the truth. I don't know why there is electricity in Kharkov.
I know, Gonzalo.
Tell me.
Because the Russians know exactly which electricity networks feed your podcast.
Oh,
and they also knew that we were going to be on it, and everybody knows that I'm just a fucking Putin agent. So,
well, Tom, okay, let's talk about this for a moment, Tom, because see, I'm a Putin agent too, but my checks have not arrived, and I'm like, what's going on here? I mean, like, I was promised a lot of money, and I haven't seen a nickel of that money or a ruble of that money.
So
are you getting it?
I'll go one better for you. I've never actually talked about this in public.
Sure.
But about 2 years ago now, before Biden,
you met Paul Pelosi. Oh my God!
No. This is better. You're going to like this. Okay. I was visited by the FBI because I was writing for Strategic Culture at the time, and they had some questions, and they were getting ready to sanction. They already knew before Biden was going to get elected that they were going to sanction Strategic Culture. I was writing for them at the time. And they had some questions about my relationship with them. And during what do you do when the FBI shows up at your door to ask you a couple of innocent questions? Well, you invite them in for coffee, which was probably a mistake, but I did it anyway. In that conversation, while I had them there, my wife comes in, and I'm like, honey, this is the FBI, and no, I'm not in trouble. And as we were chatting about all this stuff, I said, I kept bringing up Putin. I'm like, guys, you can see how I live. Like, if Putin is like bankrolling me, like, I want to know where the money is. So my wife pops up and goes, yeah, can you tell Mr. Putin, up the checks, because I need new floors.
Yeah, but nowadays, I mean, even kidding about that kind of stuff gets you into all kinds of trouble. I mean, people are taking this bullshit seriously, which is absurd. I mean, they're even claiming so far as that Elon Musk is a Putin agent. Like they believe this nonsense, and I'm like, dude, come on. I mean, what is he getting from Putin? I mean, Elon Musk has a taste for flamethrowers. Maybe Putin is sending him like some, flying Doritos or something. It's just absurd.
I actually think that the Musk thing is a big tell that Musk saw the situation, saw the lay of the land. Note that we found out that who 3 of his investors are: the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, Jack Dorsey, and Prince Alawid of Saudi Arabia, with 3 of the ones that took the company private. I think that he had the opportunity to run Twitter over the coals in court and prove that it's fictitious, that half of it's right. But he said, nope, I'm going to buy it now. I'm going to overpay for it. I got all this friggin' fuck you money that I got for selling for a top ticking Tesla, for Christ's sake. And I think he wanted the database. Notice how things are changing in terms of the subtly changing in the narrative over the last week, when all of a sudden he's got control of the Twitter database of all of these fucking blue checkmark star-bellied sneeches. He's got all their Twitter DMs. He's got all the collusion stuff between them and the governments and the tech companies and all that, because these people don't ever think that, well, they're going to lose control of it. So they used all the technology. The reason they were never able to get Trump was because Trump understands that you do business in person, and you do business by a written note that you can then burn. Like, that's why they've never been able to get Trump. They figured they were going to be able to get Trump on petty corruption stuff, packets of money to go to the construction unions and all this stuff around New York, and use that to bring him down. They didn't get that because Trump's an old school gangster, right? These guys, they just believe in the technology, and they never thought they were going to get caught. I think that's exactly why Musk pushed to just, nope, I'm taking Twitter over by Friday, because we need to get this out into the zeitgeist before the midterms and control the narrative flow for the midterm elections next week.
By the way, I'm of the opinion or suspicion that the November elections, next week's elections, are going to be crooked as all get out.
Of course
And
they are.
I mean, because the 18 election was crooked already. They stole a few key seats.
Yeah.
And 2020, I mean, come on, right? I mean, we all know a
2020 was
little bit of
retarded.
basic statistics, I mean, forget about, covering up the windows when they're recounting votes. I mean, we know basic statistics. We know the improbability of certain wins in certain counties that were key. And so, the 2022 election, I'm thinking that they're going to go for broke, because I think that, they're talking about a red wave. They're freaking out about it. And by the way, you know how older people often you tell them something in confidence, and then later they'll blurt it out because they forgot that what they heard was in confidence. And during the 2020 election, Joe Biden said, "We have built the best election stealing machinery," or something,
Right.
words along those lines.
Election fraud organization, something like that.
Yeah,
No, but it's
exactly.
better than that, because remember there was like that Newsweek story that pretty much laid out the whole conspiracy.
Yep.
They were protecting democracy.
They always
It's
tell you
not
what
a
they're going to do.
conspiracy.
They always tell you what
Yeah.
they're going to do because they're so arrogant. By the way, I have not seen an equivalent story for this election, and I've been watching it very carefully. I've been watching the court cases on election, and shoring up the election fraud and all this stuff. It's one thing, yeah, you can steal a couple of seats here and there, but they're going to need to steal 90 seats because they're going to lose 90 seats.
I wouldn't put it past them.
They'll steal 20 seats, okay, but they're going to lose 90. I can flat out tell you that they're going to lose 90 seats. There's the American election system is not monolithic. I mean, I used to do practical politics in the United States. I know, I mean, I live in a county. I live just next to a county that still hand counts their ballots because there's only 9,000 people in the county.
Right.
Okay, there's a lot of that in America, and they're not going to be able to be faked. And Florida, what you're going to see in Florida is going to be replicated in so many places. Arizona's tightened things up. Even New York, they're going to lose a number of seats in the House in New York. They lost them in 2020, and they vote harvested them yesterday after the fact. Everybody forgets that they stole like 3 seats in New York as of in the week between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
Okay. And everybody only remembers January 6th. They're not going to be able to do that this time around. Hochul's going to lose in New York. Okay.
Yeah, but for instance,
there's an outside chance Schumer is going to lose in New York.
Ooh, that would be beautiful, because I so despise that man. But for instance, in Pennsylvania, where you have literally a mentally damaged individual running for the Senate seat. And there, they sent out 240,000 ballots, which is more than enough to make up the difference. I mean, mail-in ballots, right? And so I'm just deeply suspicious. And my question is, if it's too obvious, what would the social reaction be to a stolen election? I mean, a truly stolen election. I mean, if the Democrats hold on to the House and the Senate and the governor's seats, I mean, people are going to say, no, this is bullshit. I mean, too many people are just going to say, prima facie, it's bullshit.
No, I agree, Gonzalo. This is something that scared me to death, and it's very clear that part of Davos's they always have a plan B. Like, you're right that they're always kind of doing bad jazz in real time. So their plan B is always to leave another poison pill, and the poison pill is, well, if we can't win the election, then we can steal it. If we steal the election, then that's going to cause the red states to secede. And if they don't steal the election and they win, then we're going to ratchet up the idea that the election was stolen. Russia hacked my election 2.0 is going to happen. They've already set that thing in motion. That's why the Liz Truss, the Russians hacked my cell phone, was leaked probably by MI6, okay, on purpose in order to continue to set that thing in motion so that then they can have the justification for why California and New York need to secede from the Union. They want to destroy the United States as a 50-state compact. It's very fucking clear that has been their agenda for years, since the day Trump was elected. That's what their plan was, and they've been playing jazz, bad jazz, Spyro Gyra jazz, but jazz nonetheless, to get to this moment. And they have it all up on the whiteboard, and they've got a flow chart. Like, it's not that hard. Look, the evil fuckers at Whitehall and MI6, these people are not stupid. They all live in a James Bond fucking fantasy world, but they're not dumb. And you better think that they have these plans in place.
No,
because
no,
we can
it's-
suss them
they're
out,
cunning.
They can suss them out.
I would disagree, mildly in the sense that I don't think that they're smart. They're cunning. I think that they're fundamentally
That's fine.
stupid.
Okay, that's fair.
But
Cunning is,
cunning.
but in this environment, in politics, cunning is the coin of the realm far more than intelligence. I use the word smart when I really do mean the word cunning. I'll accept that.
Yeah, because one of the things that I remember, I went to college in the early '90s, and I went to Dartmouth, and an Ivy League school, and I met a lot of other guys who went to other Ivy League schools. And what was very depressing about them was that they were number one, incredibly compliant. That is, that they would go along to get along,
Right.
And the other thing too was that they all thought that they were a lot smarter than they actually were. They were good at taking tests. They were good at getting over the obstacle course to get into a good university, but they weren't particularly intelligent. And what was remarkable was the lack of curiosity. And that's only exacerbated. And this was 30 years ago. It's gotten a hell of a lot worse. That they're just, Brett Harris is here. Brett, how's it going?
Brett!
Oh,
Good to
The
see
man,
you.
the legend. Jesus Christ, the great Brett Harris is in the room. Holy
And
shit.
by the way, I just want to tell the chat that it was because of Brett Harris's efforts that we put this show together. And so, Brett, I want to publicly, and I'll show myself on camera, even though I look like the Prince of Darkness. I look like Joe Biden in the in the red speech, right? Because I'm out in the terrace smoking cigarettes. Sorry about that. But Brett, I want to thank you so much for having put together this show. Chat, give me a +1 for Brett, because Brett made it happen. And if you're enjoying this show, then it's because of Brett. So give him a +1 if you could, please. Yeah, how's it going? What's on your mind? Hello, Brett. You got to turn on your microphone because we don't hear you. Lots of +1s for Brett. Yeah,
Without a doubt.
yeah.
One of my earliest patrons and one of my earliest fans. Brett's been with Brett and I have known each other, through chat for 6 years now.
Oh wow! No,
Yeah.
Brett. I got to meet Brett through by way of the Duran Boys.
Mhm.
Brett was moderating for them, and he's been kind enough to moderate my chats as well. And Brett, are you there? Say something to see if we can hear you. No,
No, I
we
can't
don't
hear
hear you yet. Take your time. There's no rush. But anyway, what I was mentioning before about the leaders of the West is that all of them are just fronts. You have Trudeau, you have Macron, you have Olaf Scholz to an extent. Joe Biden, who's senile and pathetic at this point. They're all fronts. And I'm just like, who is running these guys? Who is the real... the real leader there. And the depressing thing is I always think of the AOC election, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she ran, right? It came out that she had never had any interest in politics, but what had happened was that she answered an ad that was placed by hard left Democratic operatives. And they basically interviewed people to pick the one who would be most charismatic to be the candidate to run against that guy. I forget the name of the guy who
Right.
AOC beat in the primaries, in the New York primary. I mean, they are literally casting actors. I mean, not Pierre Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is basically a theater kid. I mean, the guy is a fucking idiot. But
Oh, you mean blackface Hitler? That's the way. I don't actually use his name anymore. He's just blackface Hitler.
No, man. I mean, Trudeau, man, when I see him, when he was talking about how he was going to sequester the bank accounts of the protesters, the obvious smile of glee in his face, he couldn't wipe it off his face. He was so happy. And I thought to myself, this guy is fucking evil. I mean, no kidding around. He might be a theater kid, but the guy is a sadist,
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, Brett, are you there? Brett, why don't you do something? Why don't you refresh the page and I'll pull you back in, because it could be as simple as that. Sometimes the sound gets screwy because of it. Just refresh your page and come back on. We'll wait for Brett to pop back on, because it'd be great to have him on and to thank him personally. But oh yeah, and by the way, I was incorrect when I mentioned Justin Trudeau. His actual name is Justin Castro.
Mhm.
right.
Look, I've always wondered about that because, like, for instance, Princess Diana, she's the daughter of Jimmy Goldsmith. She was not the daughter of the Earl of Spencer. You know, it's fairly well known, and I always wondered if Justin Trudeau is Castro's kid because he looks just like him, for crying out loud. This is just gossip.
Yeah, I think
I think I fixed the
no, but
problem.
Yeah, great.
oh, there, excellent.
Hear me before.
Hi, Brett.
I couldn't hear you. Hi, Alex. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
Hear me?
Where are you at, by the way?
In Melbourne, Australia.
Ah, okay. Jesus Christ, it must be like 4 in the
What
morning.
what time is it? What time is it there, Brett?
4:26 a.m.
Jesus.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Oh man, you're gonna have a rough day tomorrow or today, as the case may be.
Oh, this is my usual night. Watching things like your show, Gonzalo.
Oh,
And I
thank you so
sleep in
much.
a little.
And like I said previously, before we could hear you, thank you so much for putting the show together. It was really greatly appreciated. So what's on your
Thank you.
mind, man?
Oh, what's on my mind? The world, the war. The who, as you say, who is running the show in the West? Like I don't know who is. Could be Obama, but who else? Don't know.
Oh, it's definitely Obama.
And, the other thing on my mind is that the US has bullied the Australian government into putting B-52s in our Northern Territory with
Yes.
nuclear capability, and that is pretty. That I'm pretty angry about that.
Absolutely.
I just hope yeah.
Like everything that's been happening is just it's almost unreal that we're just kind of casually talking about nuclear war. And you know what I mean? And so
I
it's
mean,
like
I grew up in the 80s. Remember that movie The Day After? We had nuclear paranoia up the wazoo, I remember. And now it's just like la-di-da, maybe a nuclear war wouldn't be that bad. Good God.
Yeah. Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, why are they doing it? Is the system so stuffed, so crooked that they have to do something just to start it again?
Yeah.
So I can't see
it's
what
really,
else.
I think it's just, to me, it just feels like, as Alex and I talked about, it's just the next iteration of the cycle to divorce the financial world, the money world, from reality, from its lure to it's linked to oil or energy or human capital or anything along those lines. And really, it's all about property rights in the end. I haven't even thrown my libertarian bona fides on the table and like done that shit today. Like, this is all about, whether human beings have the right to self-determine or not. And
do you
they
think
just
these
don't
people
see
are
it that way.
enough to be able to control it? How can they can't even sort of run a government? So how are they supposed to control a nuclear war?
They can't.
Yeah.
It's insane. So, Brett, seriously, man, thank you for all the I hadn't had a chance to do this personally, but thank you for all the help that you've given me in keeping me, like, when the really dark times were happening, when I had no platform and I had no money coming in, this guy was there to really help, spread the word and help build that base. And it's my honor to state that to you in public here today.
Thank you,
There's
Tom.
just no other way around it.
Learned a lot from you, and Alex. I mean, what can I say about Alex? He's taught me everything I know about Bill Browder.
Oh man, but you, I think you've been extremely prolific and extremely effective at digging up all kinds of little bits of relevant dirt on him. I think that we managed to bury his credibility pretty much. I think there's little of it left.
Would you guys mind giving the lore to the chat so they know what we're talking about insofar as Browder is concerned?
Oh, you go.
Do
Alex,
we have another half an hour?
Sure, I got plenty of time. I mean,
I personally, I don't. You guys are more than welcome to. At some point, I'm going to have to drop off real soon now because.
Yeah, I might.
But
I may have to jump in another 10, 15 minutes. But yeah, okay. So just quickly, Bill Browder is a former hedge fund manager who ran back in the 1990s. He ran the largest foreign-owned hedge fund in Moscow.
Right.
And so he was participating in the Great Pirate Raid on Russia during the 1990s, which was done under the quote-unquote Russia's transition from communism to capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way Bill Browder had influenced me is that I met him once in 2005 in Monaco, and he was the first person ever I heard say anything positive about Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a little bit like, huh? So you mean Vladimir Putin is not a bad guy? That's interesting. I never heard that before. But it kind of piqued my interest into stuff going on in Russia. And by 2010, he had been kicked out of Russia. Actually, he was kicked out of Russia literally within a few days from him, my meeting him in Monaco. So like that was November 2005. Just a few days later, he flew, or maybe even the next day, he flew back. He tried to fly back to Russia and he got kicked out. And by 2010, I met him again in Monaco. And he was, he changed his story 180 degrees. He hated Vladimir Putin, and he was, in 2005, he was saying like everybody in the world should own shares of Gazprom. 5 years later, he was saying like, no, keep your money out of Russia. It's a horrible place. Don't ever invest any money into Russia. It's a mafiocracy. And I was like, huh? What? What happened? And then 5 years later, he published Red Notice, which is like pretty much turned into a bestseller that they intended to use to make a Hollywood blockbuster out of. And it all kind of unraveled for Bill Browder, but still, he's been probably the world's most prolific anti-Putin propagandist, anti-Russia propagandist, and the chief lobbyist for Cold War and hot war against Russia in the West. Probably works for MI6, but I heard credible people say that no, he's CIA. I don't know which,
Well,
but
I've got a theory which I think is, well, I think it can be sort of argued that Bill Browder was the person who set up the Trump Tower meeting.
Absolutely.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
Rob Goldstone has to be MI6 for sure. I think he just the whole setup was that Goldstone told Don Jr. what he wanted to hear, and he told Miss Guy what she wanted to hear, and that's why the meeting just didn't cross, because they didn't know what they were talking about. But the whole point was to get the meeting, because you got to remember Browder's lawyer was Jonathan Weiner, and Jonathan White in the State Department, and he was Steele's handler in the State Department. And he also wanted to discredit Glenn Simpson because he was on the case, and the whole thing was all done to for Russiagate and to try to hide his deposition and discredit the legal team.
Yep.
And it sort of makes complete sense. It's too many coincidences. The Steele connection with Weiner and Browder with Weiner, and then Glenn Simpson on both sides.
And notice. It always links. No, I just wanted to point out it always links back to London.
Yep.
Oh yeah,
it does.
But remember,
and then we start bringing in the Martin Armstrong angle and Edmund Safra, and all of this stuff. And Browder was all involved in that. And then, you know, like I know the Vanessa Beeley and no, it's what's her name? The Lucy Commissar, like all that
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
that and all the stuff that I you know when I was friendly with Lee Stranahan on and all this stuff early on. And this is what like set me down that rabbit hole. And it's very clear that this was, you know, that Browder is being protected by very, very powerful people.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of Browder's existence was to eventually get the Magnitsky Act passed, which then allowed for the sanctioning of individuals on human rights abuses to get around and start doing sector and individual sanctions and get around national sanctions, because they needed to have the ability to have leverage on individuals, because that's how they figured they were going to be able to overthrow governments, and how they were ever able to get a hold of Putin and get rid of him was to turn all the oligarchs against him. And
Yeah, and that was Browder's brainchild. That was Browder's brainchild.
Absolutely was.
But I always
Yeah,
think that
you-
all this sanctioning just played into the hands of Putin himself, because it basically separated the wheat from the chaff. Those who were pro-Western split, and those who remained were cut off from Europe or the West. You know, I always thought that was just such a stupid thing to do.
Yeah, Gonzalo. But you know, we already mastered the lesson that they are stupid. They are stupid.
Yeah,
Oh,
they don't think of the secondary and third tier results of their actions.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Greg.
The email leak, Robert Otto email leak, and they had the photo of Browder having Vessel Nitskaya's house watched 3 days before the Trump Tower meeting in Moscow.
Right. Wow.
They were just a complete giveaway.
Yeah,
That's
that is a complete giveaway. After a certain point, I kind of stopped following the whole thing, because I just had to go back to the 40,000-foot level as to what how that will turn into policy. But yeah, I mean, every time you dig into the details of this, it's all just unbelievably dirty and awful. And you know, there just comes a point where that's for the investigative journalists to do.
But they don't.
I'm just a shit poster.
That's the worst part. Anyway, gentlemen, we've been going on for a little over 2.5 hours. It's been a real delight. Brett, once again, thank you so much for putting this together. I really so much appreciate it. Alex, it's a pleasure to have met you, Brett. Yeah. And
thanks,
Alex. Likewise, Gonzalo.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Tom, it was
so.
great meeting you finally. And because we both posted in different common places, and I always read your stuff, and so yeah, it was so weird that, you know, back in 2012, 11, or whenever it was, I was reading your stuff, and I never thought that we'd ever actually talk, and here we are. Right. So it's a pleasure, real pleasure. Chat, stick around, guys, because I just want to say a few private words before we go. And chat, I hope you enjoyed the show. Why don't you give our guests, you know, a +1 to send them off, because it's been a real pleasure for me, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. So everybody, that's the end of the show. Thank you so much, and I will catch you next time.
Thank you.